Romantic Tales. Chapter 245. Qin Feng gritted his teeth. Of the 20 shadow guards, at least 15 of them knew martial arts, alright? Whoever dares to use Qin Gong, I'll make you fly to the top of the cliff and jump back down 20 times. Yili said with a smile as she stared at the shadow guards who were trying to trick them. The shadow guards who were secretly enjoying the sorry state of their companions couldn't help but feel their legs go soft and they almost fell to the ground. Regardless of whether he understood it or not, when Qin Feng left with Yili in the evening, he couldn't help but look back with pity at the Ding Kingdom's elites who were lying outside the wall and unable to get up. Hearing the howls of wolves and the roars of unknown beasts coming from the distant forest, Qin Feng couldn't help but think that for Wang Fei to find such a place so close to the capital, was it because the heavens didn't like them? Wang Fei, should this subordinate stay behind to look after them? Those experts were indeed experts, but none of them looked like they could control those arrogant elite soldiers. It would be troublesome if there was a conflict at that time. Yili smiled and said, "Don't worry, they won't be able to run out. Those who run out without permission will be treated as deserters." Am I worried that they will run away? I don't have time to look after them every day. It's fine to let them fight on their own in the beginning. It's fine as long as they don't kill anyone. 7 days later, I will let Shadow 2 and Shadow 3 take turns to teach them. Qin Feng was silent for a moment before asking, "This subordinate doesn't understand what Wang Fei wants to use them for." They can do a lot of things. Assassinations, intelligence gathering, guards, search, infiltration, ambush, rescue and interrogation. No matter if it is land warfare, water warfare, field warfare or street warfare, there is nothing that you can't think of that they can't learn. Qin Feng felt that his brain was a bit muddled. Even the soldiers of the Black Cloud Cavalry didn't know that much. Assassinations and intelligence gathering, aren't those the shadow guards? Why do they need to train other people? Is Wang Fei not satisfied with the shadow guards? Yili turned to look at his conflicted face and smiled. It is good for everyone to do their own job, but I prefer to have a troop that can do anything. Qin Feng thought for a moment before replying, "If we can really do what Wang Fei says, then our battle strength can change completely." Yili shook her head and said, "The so-called elites are the minority. Just like the Black Cloud Cavalry, the skills that they learn are not something that most soldiers can grasp. Also, we don't need so much, it's just a waste of resources. You should remember that the people I asked you to choose are all literate. This is not something that most soldiers can achieve." Qin Feng nodded. In the army, even among elites like the Black Cloud Cavalry, only half of the people were literate. Qin Feng more or less understood what Yili meant. The princess consort wanted to cultivate a group of people who were proficient in both the pen and the sword. But what was the use of cultivating so many talents? That's right, Qin Feng. When they were about to reach the city gates, Yili stopped the horse and examined Qin Feng. "You were originally the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry, so you should know one rule, right? What? Keep it a secret. What you see today and what you experience in the next 3 months without my permission, you are not allowed to reveal it to anyone." Qin Feng couldn't help but swallow. "Including the prince?" "Including the prince." This subordinate obeys. When they returned to the Wang Fu, night had already fallen. Qin Feng had received a bit of a shock today and went to find an heir and San for advice as soon as he returned. When Yili returned to her room, Mo Xiuyao was reading a book under the light. Hearing the sound of footsteps, he raised his head to look at her. "You left the city?" Yili nodded and turned to wash up. When she came out, the originally empty table was already filled with steaming hot food. Qing Xia and Qing Shuang looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was looking at them, and said with a smile, "Are you very free today? You're actually not busy in the study. Didn't the emperor summon you into the palace this morning?" The two of them were extremely busy after returning from the southern border. The emperor in the palace seemed to have a stroke. Even though Mo Xiuyao hadn't officially gone to court yet, he summoned Mo Xiuyao into the palace every day to discuss matters. There wasn't anything to begin with, it's just that our emperor likes to discuss matters with his subjects recently. Mo Xiuyao said with a faint smile. He reached out to pull Yili to the table and indicated for her to eat first. Seeing that the table was filled with her favorite dishes, Yili smiled gratefully at him. Even though she wasn't really hungry, but having someone prepare food for her the moment she returned home was a good feeling. "The emperor is prepared to hand over all matters regarding the marriage with the northern tribes to me." When Yili was almost done eating, Mo Xiuyao said, Hand it over to you? Yili frowned. After drinking the last mouthful of soup, she had the servants put the food away. She looked at him in confusion and asked, "What do you mean by hand it over to you?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, "It means that I will be in charge of everything, including receiving the northern tribe's envoys, confirming the marriage partner, preparing the dowry and sending the bride." Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Yili couldn't help but frown. "You need to confirm the marriage partner to receive the northern tribe's envoys?" Mo Xiaoyao looked at her with a smile. "In reality, you need to be in charge of confirming the marriage partner. So these days, you will probably be very busy and won't be able to go out of the city." Yili weakly waved her hand. She didn't even need to imagine what would happen when the news spread out. Which noble in the capital would be willing to marry their daughter to the northern tribes, a barren place? She was afraid that tomorrow the people who came to plead for her would break the threshold of the Prince Ding mansion. The worst thing was that she couldn't choose no one, but no matter who she chose, she would definitely offend people. So the emperor wanted to make more enemies for the Prince Ding mansion? There are people watching over there, so I don't have to run out of the city every day. But what do you think about the marriage partner? Mo Xiaoyao thought for a while and said, "The emperor's thoughts are hinting that the eldest daughter of the Hua family is the most suitable. The Empress Dowager prefers Princess Rong Hua, but the Empress Dowager can't say anything now. In addition, the third daughter of the Lu family and Princess Shunqing are also candidates. But they are not very eye-catching. I'm afraid the northern tribes won't agree." Yili frowned and said, "So, it is very likely that the final choice will be between Tianxiang and Princess Ronghua? Since the emperor likes Tianxiang, why didn't he make the decree himself?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "He is now having a headache. So he naturally wants us to offend people. I know that you and Miss Hua are good friends, so it's not a big deal to remove her. Later you can just pick one of the princesses of the royal family." As long as people have selfish motives, Yili and Hua Tianxiang have a good relationship. So naturally she didn't want Hua Tianxiang to be chosen for the marriage. Yili couldn't help but feel annoyed when she was assigned the task of choosing a candidate for the marriage alliance. No matter who she chose to handle this matter, she would feel guilty. She would rather risk her life on the battlefield than handle this matter cleanly. Seeing Yili frown, Mo Xiaoyao just shook his head slightly and said indifferently, "Being in the royal family, they are supported by the people. Whether it is the marriage or dying on the battlefield, it is their fate. Li doesn't have to feel sorry." Chapter 246. Yili shook her head and said helplessly, "These princesses are all spoiled and pampered. Who knows how much they would suffer if they were to marry into the northern tribes. If the two countries really wanted to marry each other, then it would be fine. But it was obvious that it was just for show. Both countries knew that the princess was just a useless sacrifice. If the two countries did not marry each other, they would not fight for a while. If they did marry each other, it was impossible for them to not fight. It was just that they were not prepared for it yet. Yili was not someone who could not make decisions, but she hated this kind of meaningless sacrifice. Knowing that she was not in a good mood, Mo Xiaoyao did not continue this topic. He smiled and said, "What did you do outside the city today? You borrowed 8 experts from me and transferred people from the Mahist Army's Black Cloud Cavalry and Shadow Guard. What do you want to do? Is Miss Li really not going to tell me?" Yili looked up and smiled. "I am still in the experimental stage. I want to see what I can do in these few months. I will tell you when I have the results. If it doesn't work, I will return them to you." Mo Xiaoyao thought for a while and said, "What does Miss Li want to train a group of people for? The shadow guards around you are all pretty well trained. Yesterday the shadow guard commander even asked me if he could ask you to train his subordinates. I heard that in Yonglin the 2 by your side took care of my shadow guard. It was just a sneak attack." Yili smiled. "It is not easy to sneak attack. As a shadow guard, they were used to being in the dark and being on guard at all times. If these people could be sneak attacked by 2 people, it proved that they were stronger." Yili smiled. "When this group of people comes out, I can send a few to be your guards." Mo Xiaoyao nodded. "I will wait and see. If Miss Li can really train a group of experts, these people can be your guards." "That's too wasteful." Yili shook her head and smiled. "You'll know what they can do when the time comes. Just don't try to steal them from me. I hope they can exist openly in the army." Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows in surprise. "I thought Ali wanted them to become a secret force." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Of course we still need to keep it a secret. However, what we need to hide is their numbers, where they are stationed, their true strength, and their detailed identities. We don't need to hide their achievements or their existence. If it was really as I imagined, their existence would be known sooner or later, and it would be impossible for them to hide. I hope that they will be rewarded like normal soldiers, and those who are capable will be promoted." The Black Cloud Cavalry was still a proper army, but the Shadow Guard was a bit of a scam. Except for a few who could stand out from the crowd, almost all the Shadow Guards could only be Shadow Guards for the rest of their lives. They didn't have an honorable identity, no promotion, no glory, no friends, and they couldn't even get married and have children. Most of them were too old to be Shadow Guards. Although they were supported by the king's palace, they weren't young anymore. Most of their lives were ruined. Like this, there weren't any traitors in the Ding King's palace's Shadow Guard. It could only be said that the ancient people placed great importance on loyalty and righteousness. Mo Shuyao lowered his head and thought for a moment before saying, "Li didn't treat the people by your side as Shadow Guards from the start. And Yi went to the army, and with his strength that could be considered outstanding among the Shadow Guard, it was only a matter of time before he stood out. And Si went to Xiling to handle some matters. As for the Air and Insan by your side, you should also teach them some of the things on the surface to handle." Yi Li smiled and said, "Whether it is their ability or intelligence, they are much stronger than most people. However, most of their lives can only be hidden in the dark. I feel that it is too much of a waste of talent. Moreover, the human heart is something that is very difficult to understand. Perhaps one day they won't want to hide in the dark anymore? If that day really comes, the consequences will be even more serious than not having a Shadow Guard. Therefore, if they have the ability and are willing to be used by me, I naturally can't treat them unfairly. Of course, if someone wants to betray me, I won't be merciful." Mo Shuyao thought for a moment and said, "Li's words are reasonable, but Li might not know that there are actually many large families that have their own hidden powers. Especially those like the personal Shadow Guard. They know too many secrets of their masters, so the control is very strict. In some families, the Shadow Guard who knows too much will be silenced in the end." Yi Li said, "Then it's also impossible to give the Shadow Guard the same military position or other ranks, and the same clear rewards and punishments. After a certain number of years, they will be transferred to the Black Cloud Cavalry or the Mahist Army." Mo Shuyao was a bit curious and said with a smile, "What does Li Li have in mind?" Yi Li said, "If I am satisfied with the results of this training, these people should be able to serve before the age of 35. After 35, they will not be allowed to leave and will be transferred to the Mahist army with the same rank. Of course, if they have other abilities and interests, they can also consider civil service or other positions. This is just a thought. In any case, the people haven't even been trained yet, so there is still time to consider this problem." Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and said, "I understand, Li Li wants to pave the way for their future, right?" Yi Li nodded and looked at Mo Shuyao with a serious expression. "I once heard a saying, the soldiers have already shed blood for the country, so they shouldn't be allowed to shed any more tears. There are also those retired veterans and injured soldiers, their days aren't easy. However, I can't care so much right now, so I have to at least settle down the people under me." Because she used to be a soldier, but the treatment in her previous life was naturally much better than the people in this life. In ancient times, being a soldier wasn't a glorious profession. Good men didn't become soldiers and good iron didn't make nails. Many people joined the army because they had no other choice. Although I don't know why Li Li would have such thoughts, I will think about it carefully." Mo Shuyao looked at the woman who was deep in thought and said softly. Early in the morning, Yi Li received the Empress summons from the palace. In fact, she was already impressed by Mo Jingqi's patience that the emperor didn't summon her to the palace as soon as they returned to the capital. With Yi Li's current status in the entire capital, other than the emperor, the empress, and the empress dowager, no one could casually request to see her. However, the empress dowager could be said to be under house arrest by Mo Jingqi. Last time something happened when Yi Li entered the palace. Prince Ding could completely refuse the emperor's summons to Princess Ding, so he summoned her in the name of the empress. The empress summoned Yi Li in the name of admiring flowers. It was said that the begonia flowers in the imperial garden bloomed beautifully, so the empress ordered all the noble madams in the capital to welcome Princess Ding and admire the flowers at the same time. Seeing the flowers in the imperial garden, Yili vaguely remembered that this year's 100-flower festival had already ended. She couldn't help but smile. She was busy all day outside, so how could she still remember the festival that the noble ladies in the capital were longing for? Yili wanted to enter the palace, and Mo Shuyao didn't care whether he had received the Empress' invitation and directly followed her. It was obvious that he didn't trust the royal family. Mo Jingqi was so angry that his face turned black, but he couldn't say anything. After all, the matter of the Empress Dowager's disappearance had yet to be investigated. Chapter 247. Prince Ding Wangfei definitely won't be lost here at Ai's place. Could it be that you still don't believe in Ai? Empress Hua looked at the two people walking together and couldn't help but smile. Looking at Yili's eyes, there was a bit of sighing and envy, so she teased the two with a smile. Mo Shuyao and Hua family's relationship was originally close. Obviously, Mo Shuyao didn't have any ill feelings towards the Empress. He faintly smiled and said, Lily has never liked crowds. There are also no elders in our food to teach her. It's inevitable that she doesn't know many things. I just happened to be idle today, so I accompanied her. Please don't blame the Empress. Being so intimate in public made Yili look at Mo Shuyao a bit uncomfortably. Mo Shuyao's expression was as usual, still as gentle as jade. Seeing this, the noble women and young ladies present couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. For a moment, it wasn't known how many envious and jealous gazes were cast on Yili. Yili could clearly see Hua Tianxiang, who was standing beside the Empress, gloating at her misfortune. She couldn't help but secretly glare at her. Even I feel honored that Prince Ding has followed your majesty here. However, those who came today are all women. If Prince Ding stays here, I'm afraid they will feel embarrassed. The Empress looked at the two with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, therefore Prince Ding should go somewhere else. Don't disturb Ai's banquet. Sitting on the side, Xiaoyang Princess also smiled and said, Empress is right. When Ding King Fu's second Gongzi appeared, more than half of the capital's young ladies lost their souls. Xiao Yao shouldn't stay here and attract attention. With the Empress and I here, are you still afraid that your Wangfei will be harmed? Xiaoyang Princess, who had always been a bit cold, was clearly in a good mood and actually started joking. The words that came out of her mouth made the young ladies present blush. They all lowered their heads, not daring to look at the outstanding figure standing in front of the Empress. Seeing the different expressions on everyone's faces, Yili couldn't help but laugh in her heart. She looked at Mo Shuyao and said softly, if Prince has something to do, you can go do it. I'm not in the way. Mo Shuyao nodded and said softly, I'll go see His Majesty first. I'll wait for you to return to the food together. Yili nodded. Only then did Mo Shuyao bid farewell to the Empress and eldest princess, turning to leave. Hua Tianxiang, who was standing beside the Empress, winked at Yili with a flirtatious look on her face. Being so lovey-dovey in public really made people hate them. After sending off the eye-catching Mo Shuyao, Yili sat down in the first empty seat next to the Empress. Opposite her, eldest Princess Xiaoyang smiled kindly at her, but Princess Zhaoren and Princess Ronghua were not so kind. In this regard, Yili was a little helpless. She didn't have any likes or dislikes for Princess Ronghua, but this princess seemed to look down on her, Princess Ding. In the past, when Yi Ying was here, most of the time Princess Ronghua's firepower was concentrated on Yi Ying, but now that Yi Ying was gone, Princess Ronghua's attention was obviously back to her. Looking at the look of disdain in her eyes, Yili laughed in her heart. Does this Princess Ronghua know that a large part of her future may be in her hands? Imperial concubine Yun has arrived. Wang Zhaorong has arrived. Just as the Empress was about to speak, a sharp voice came from outside. The Empress couldn't help but frown. Obviously she didn't like the people who came. Not long after, two well-dressed women leisurely walked over. The woman in the lead had a charming appearance and an exquisite figure. There was a hint of seductiveness between her brows. Although the woman beside her only had a delicate and pretty appearance, her pair of slender phoenix eyes outlined a hint of enchanting intent. The two stepped forward and bowed. These concubines greet the Empress. These two were the Emperor's favorite concubines. Imperial concubine Yun was one of the 4 concubines. Everyone present except for Yi Li and the 2 princesses had to stand up and greet her. The Empress glanced at the two and faintly said, "You may rise." Why did Imperial concubine Yun and Wang Zhaorong come? Imperial concubine Yun smiled and said, "This concubine has disturbed the Empress' mood. It's just that. This concubine and younger sister Wang heard that Princess Ding is also here today. This concubine has admired Princess Ding's reputation for a long time. Finally getting this opportunity, we asked the Emperor to come and greet Princess Ding." Imperial concubine Yun's words were said innocently, but she also pointed out to everyone that she came because of the Emperor's decree. Moreover, she specially came to see Princess Ding. Originally, when the Empress summoned a woman with a title without an invitation, even concubines could not come before the age of 18. Her words not only washed away the accusation of looking down on the Empress, but also pointed out the Emperor's love for her. "I don't dare to greet you." Yili greets Imperial concubine Yun. Yili faintly smiled but had no intention of standing up to greet her. The Yun family and the Wang family were Mo Jingqi's loyalists. The Empress was not trusted by Mo Jingqi. Noble consort Lu had a cold personality. Mo Jingqi wanted to test Yili, so he naturally sent Imperial concubine Yun. Imperial concubine Yun was slightly startled. She turned her head to look at Yili, who was sitting to the side. Most women always had some hostility towards women who were more outstanding than them. Before, Imperial concubine Yun was not very favored. Naturally, she had not seen Princess Ding. However, these days she had heard many things about Princess Ding. The Yun family was originally loyal to the Emperor. Now that the Emperor had given up on the Yi family and supported the Yun family, he also doted on Imperial concubine Yun very much. Although Imperial concubine Yun did not overestimate herself and want to provoke the Empress and noble consort Lu, she did not care about ordinary people. Therefore Yi Li, who seemed to be very afraid of the Emperor, naturally paid more attention to her. Originally, Imperial concubine Yun thought she would see a graceful and noble woman like the Empress or a beauty like noble consort Lu. However, when Imperial concubine Yun turned her head, she saw a woman sitting to the right of the Empress wearing a light green dress with silver peony patterns. Her black hair was casually tied up, and there were 2 pearl-tasseled hairpins in her hair. Compared to the beautiful clothes and exquisite makeup of the noblewomen present, she was more graceful and casual. It seemed that it was very difficult for people to connect her with the rumored woman who led 2,000 Black Cloud cavalry to guard the border city. It was even harder to imagine that Prince Ding seemed to dote on this princess very much. Imperial concubine Yun had also seen Su Zuidi. The Princess Ding in front of her was beautiful, but compared to the peerless Su Zuidi, she seemed to be lacking a bit. "This is Princess Ding? Your Highness the Empress, can this concubine sit with Princess Ding? This concubine has admired Princess Ding's elegance for a long time. I really want to have a good chat with Princess." Suppressing the confusion in her heart, Imperial concubine Yun smiled brightly, making people unable to refuse. The Empress glanced at her and faintly said, "Since it's like this, you and Wang Zhaorong can sit with Princess Ding." Imperial concubine Yun's eyes flashed, but she still happily agreed. Pulling Wang Zhaorong, she sat down next to Yi Li. Although she was unwilling to sit next to Yi Li, she also knew that Princess Ding would not give her a seat. Or it could be said that even if Princess Ding really got up to give her a seat, she might not really dare to sit down. The gathering between the noble ladies was more or less the same. It was just that there were many people with other things on their minds today. When most of the people had arrived, the Empress personally got up and led everyone to the Imperial Garden to admire the flowers. Sure enough, the Imperial Garden was filled with flowers. Although it was already the beginning of summer, the scenery did not lose to spring. The noble ladies sat in groups of 2s and 3s to chat and admire the flowers. Yi Li and the others with high statuses naturally followed the Empress. After walking around the garden, the Empress led everyone to a pavilion in the middle of the Imperial Garden to sit down. Only then did the Empress ask with a smile, "Princess Ding rarely comes to the palace. What do you think of the scenery in the palace?" Yi Li smiled and said, "It's naturally rich and graceful, just like a paradise." The Empress glanced at her and said, "You're also speaking pleasantries with I. Rich and graceful is true, but just like a paradise. What kind of paradise would be like this?" Her tone was filled with irritation and indifference. Shaking her head, she said with a smile, "If it were up to me, it would be best to let nature take its course. The scenery in the palace is extremely beautiful, but with all these things gathered together, it is a bit dazzling. I have been to the Prince Ding mansion before. I think it must be to Princess liking." Chapter 248. The Ding Prince's mansion was very large, but the decorations were very comfortable and elegant. Yili was very fond of it. Xiaoyang Princess nodded her head in agreement, saying with a smile, "What the Empress says is correct. When I was young, I often liked to stay at the Prince Ding mansion. Every time I was reluctant to return." Yili smiled faintly and replied, "Your Imperial Highness and Princess praise us too much. The Prince Ding mansion has been filled with military officers for generations. It is unavoidable that it is somewhat crude. The Prince and I do not like bustling places. We only seek peace and quiet." Sitting at Yi Li's side, Imperial concubine Yun curiously asked. This concubine heard the Emperor say that Princess Ding once guarded Yonglin in Yongzhou and assisted the defending generals in resisting the Prince of Li's rebel army. Can Princess Consort tell us what happened at that time? So it turns out that Princess Consort also knows martial arts. No wonder last year, you were able to frighten the Xiling Princess into a daze with a single arrow. Yi Li smiled faintly and replied, "Imperial concubine Yun is joking. It was only because the prince was worried about my safety that he learned some superficial martial arts. The ones guarding Yonglin were the soldiers at the border, not Yi Li." Wang Xiaorong smiled and replied, "Princess Consort is too modest. This concubine has also heard the Emperor speak of it. The Emperor also said that if it were not for Princess Consort's efforts, shattering Snow Pass would have been lost long ago. Princess Consort has worked hard for the Dechu state. It is a pity that this concubine has lived in the palace for so long and is unable to contribute to the Dechu state like Princess Consort. It is truly a life's regret." Wang Xiaorong also wants to contribute to the Dechu state? Why don't I ask Imperial Father to send you to the border to contribute to the Dechu state? With Wang Xiaorong being so loyal to the Dechu state, Imperial Father will definitely be very happy. Everyone turned their heads to see Princess Changle, who was wearing a pink dress. She blinked her bright eyes and giggled as she looked at Wang Xiaorong. Forcing a smile, Wang Xiaorong replied, "Princess must be joking. Your concubine does not have the strength to truss a chicken." Even though she was favored and placed in an important position by her family, Wang Xiaorong still did not dare to provoke Princess Changle. Princess Changle was the Empress's only daughter, as well as the only legitimate child of the entire Dechu state's imperial household. Although Mo Jingqi did not dote on the Empress, he still respected her. He doted on this innocent and cute princess even more. If Princess Changle were to run to the imperial study and spread rumors, then he would be in deep trouble. Princess Changle rolled her eyes. Disdainfully looking at her, she stated, "Then why are you still speaking so much nonsense? This princess thought that you were too embarrassed to tell Imperial Father. It just so happens that Uncle Prince Ding is also in the imperial study. This princess will help you ask Imperial Father. Perhaps Imperial Father will agree on account of your loyalty." "Changle, cease your nonsense." Seeing Princess Changle's indecent actions, the Empress frowned in displeasure. Making a funny face, Princess Changle stepped into the pavilion and properly paid her respects. Daughter pays respects to Imperial Mother. Greetings to Princess Ding and the two grand-aunts. Xiaoyang Princess extended her hand to pull Princess Changle over. Smiling, she said, "It's been a long time since we last met. Little princess, you've grown into a young lady." With a smile, Yi Li led the way. It had only been a year since they last met, but Princess Changle had indeed grown considerably compared to when she had first met her outside Yaohua Palace. At the very least, she no longer appeared to be hiding in the bushes. Princess Changle clearly still remembered Yi Li lying in Princess Xiaoyang's embrace. She winked at her. Startled, Yi Li responded with a shallow smile. Imperial concubine Yun looked at Princess Changle, who was acting spoiled in Princess Xiaoyang's embrace. Smiling, she said, "Princess, we were just about to hear about the Princess Consort's story of leading soldiers into battle at the border town. Does Princess not wish to hear about it?" Princess Changle's eyes turned. Smiling brightly, she said, "This princess is a virtuous and virtuous woman. Of course, I would not pry into other people's private affairs. Only those wicked women who spend all day scheming against others would expend great effort to pry into other people's private affairs. Isn't that right, Imperial Concubine Yun?" The gentle smile on Imperial Concubine Yun's face was somewhat stiff. Forcing a smile, she said, "Of course the princess is a virtuous and virtuous woman." Princess Changle lightly snorted. Turning her head to the Empress, she asked, "Imperial Concubine Mother, Can this son invite Princess Ding and elder cousin to play? Smiling faintly, the Empress replied, that will depend on whether or not Princess Ding has the time to play with you. You're not young anymore. All day long you're pestering people to play with you. What are you thinking? Smiling, Princess Changle replied, this girl is very fond of Princess Ding. The Empress turned her head to Yi Li and smiled. This girl is not sensible. Princess, please don't laugh at her. Yi Li smiled and replied, how can that be? The princess is pure and kind. To be liked by the princess is Yi Li's honor. May I know where the princess wishes to invite me to play? Princess Changle joyfully left Xiaoyang Princess' embrace, pulling Yi Li with one hand and Hua Tianxiang with the other as she ran outside. Follow this princess. Yi Li's nimble movements did not matter. On the contrary, Hua Tianxiang, being dragged along by Princess Changle, stumbled and fell. Behind them, the Empress helplessly instructed the servants to follow and keep an eye on them. Princess Changle pulled the two through the imperial gardens, running all the way to the back of the rockery in the northwest corner of the imperial gardens before stopping. Turning her head, she saw that the palace servants had not followed them. Only then did she relax and frown. Softly complaining, she said, these people are truly annoying. Following me everywhere. Yi Li smiled and replied, they are following the Empress and the Emperor's orders. If they can't find you, perhaps they will be punished. Waving her hand, Princess Changle replied, don't worry. My imperial mother is a good person. She will not casually punish palace servants. However, those people are very annoying. They like to tell imperial father and the other concubines what I say. This princess hates them. The two of you follow me. With a face full of smiles, Princess Changle climbed up the rockery. As she did so, she turned her head and said to the two, this place is very large. If we climb up, they won't be able to find us. Yi Li looked around. This rockery was indeed quite large. If they hid here and did not look carefully, they might not be able to find them. However, Princess, why are we climbing up? Princess Changle turned her head to look at her. Stroking her hair, which was adorned with a string of pearls, she replied, Uncle Prince Ding said that a bad woman has made you unhappy and wanted me to find a place to hide you. In a moment he will come to pick you up. Also, doesn't elder cousin have something to tell you? Yi Li did not know whether to laugh or cry. Hide her. She dared to bet that this was not what Mo Shuyao had told Princess Changle. Tilting her head, she looked at the similarly astonished Hua Tianxiang. Hua Tianxiang was also looking at Princess Changle. Princess Changle lightly snorted, turning her head to continue climbing. Who is this princess? Imperial father wishes to marry elder cousin Xiangxiang to the northern tribes. Asked Mama. The northern tribes is a very bad place. The people there are coarse and barbaric. It is cold and secluded. There is also no good food to eat. I went to beg Uncle Prince Ding. Uncle Prince Ding said that Princess Ding has the final say in this matter. As a result, we can speak now. Come on up. Helpless, the two could only follow her and climb up. Sure enough, there was a place halfway up the rockery where people could hide. Seeing how quiet it was obvious that there were people here often. Sitting on the rockery, Yi Li smiled and asked, therefore, Princess wishes to request that I not marry Tianxiang to the northern tribes? Princess Changle gazed at her anxiously. Will you agree? Yi Li smiled. What benefits would there be if I agree? Thinking it over, Princess Changle replied, this princess can give you all of my treasures. I have many treasures. They were all given to me by imperial father. Imperial mother said that these things are very precious. Is that possible? Chapter 249. Changle. Hua Tianxiang's eyes reddened. Of course, she did not want to be married off to the northern tribes. However, regardless of whether it was her father, mother, grandfather, or grandmother, they all knew that although the emperor had said that Princess Ding would be fully responsible for this matter, if he truly wanted her to be married off, even Li Er would be powerless. She only wanted the Prince Ding mansion to bear the reputation of offending the Hua family. As a result, from the very beginning, neither her grandfather, grandmother, nor herself had any intention of speaking with Li Er, only making things difficult for her. Why does Princess not want Tianxiang to be married off? Princess Changle bit her lip as she gazed at the two. After a long time she hesitantly replied, Imperial Mother said that only princesses can be married off. However, we currently do not have a suitable princess. As a result, we have to choose someone else for the marriage. Imperial Mother said that these are all matters of the Imperial clan. This princess is still young. Otherwise, this princess will personally go for the marriage. With cousin Xiang gone, maternal grandmother, uncle and aunt will be sad. Aunt will also cry in front of Imperial Mother. Princess Changle spoke intermittently, but both of them understood. Princess Changle believed that Tianxiang was going to suffer in her place in the marriage. As a result, she impatiently came to beg Yi Li. With great difficulty, Princess Changle finished speaking. Gazing hopefully at her, she asked, Princess Ding, can you not have cousin Xiang go for the marriage? Yi Li smiled faintly. Nodding her head, she replied, I can. I promise you. Leah. Hearing this, Hua Tianxiang stared blankly. Gently biting her red lips, she gazed at Yi Li. Her normally bright and beautiful eyes flickered with tears. She knew that Yi Li was in a difficult position. For the emperor to hand over such an important matter to the Prince Ding mansion, it appeared that he had great trust in the Prince Ding mansion. In reality, he had pushed the Prince Ding mansion to the heart of the struggle. Yi Li's easy acceptance of Princess Changle's request made Hua Tianxiang both happy and worried. Yi Li reached out to grasp Hua Tianxiang's hand, which was tightly tugging at her sleeve, and lightly patted it. Smiling, she stated, a person's heart is always somewhat biased. What's more, it's a matter of offending people anyway. Why can't I choose something that makes me feel better? Princess Changle did not understand what was so difficult about this matter. Cheerfully throwing herself into Yi Li's embrace, she smiled and said, You really are a good person. This princess likes you. Yi Li's elegant eyebrows rose. Smiling, she asked, If I do not agree, princess will not like me? Princess Changle looked at Yi Li with an awkward expression. It seems that the palace is truly not a peaceful place to talk. Yi Li smiled and replied, What's so inconvenient about it? If you have the time, just come and find me. Thinking it over, Hua Tianxiang shook her head and said, Forget it. I know that you don't have the time to play right now. Yi Li thought about how she had only been back for 2 or 3 days. He was truly too busy. Helplessly, she smiled and said, It's been too long since I've been in the capital. I haven't even seen older sister Zheng'er yet. Hua Tianxiang curled her lips and said, Sooner or later, you will be a family. Zheng'er has been detained by her mother in preparation for her marriage. Even if you want to see her, you won't necessarily be able to. Sweeping her gaze over the palace maids who had almost arrived, Yi Li laughed softly and said, If you weren't so picky, everything would have been fine if the marriage had been set early. Hua Tianxiang stared blankly, her charming face immediately turning red. The palace maids who had been searching for Zheng'er had already arrived. She could only glare hatefully at Yi Li, unable to say anything. Returning to the pavilion, Imperial concubine Yun and Wang Zhaorong were no longer there. The Empress saw Hua Tianxiang's delicate face, which had yet to fade, and then looked at Princess Changle, who was winking at her. Understanding, she nodded towards Yi Li with some gratitude. Yi Li smiled faintly, pulling Princess Changle into the pavilion to sit down. Only Zhaoyang Princess, Zhaoran Princess and Princess Ronghua remained in the pavilion. Although the other noble ladies wanted to plead for their daughters, they knew that the palace was not a place where one could do as they pleased. As such, they did not come forward to disturb them. As soon as Yi Li sat down, she sensed 2 unfriendly gazes directed at her from across the pavilion. As always, Princess Zhaoran was picky and contemptuous, while Princess Ronghua glared at Yi Li with even more resentment than her mother's. Yi Li picked up the teacup that a palace maid had just brought over. Just as she lifted the lid, Qingyu, who was behind her, suddenly spoke, Princess Consort has overworked herself recently and is weak and cold. Sir Shen has instructed that Princess Consort should avoid green tea. Yi Li's hand paused. Holding the teacup, she lightly inhaled. Regretfully, she sighed, This is first-rate Longjing tea. It is a waste of Her Imperial Majesty's good tea. The Empress's eyes flashed, a trace of coldness flitting across her brow. Smiling at Yi Li, she said, This Longjing tea is indeed good. However, the body is still more important. If you like it, I can have someone send some to the Prince Ding mansion. Yi Li was not polite. Smiling, she replied, Then many thanks to Her Imperial Majesty. Imperial Majesty, please do not blame me for being greedy. Princess Changle sat in Yi Li's embrace. Blinking her clear eyes, she stood up and said, Imperial Mother, Changle is going to practice calligraphy. Chapter 250. The Empress dotingly looked at her daughter and nodded. Go. After Princess Changle disappeared, Princess Ronghua looked critically at Yili. With a light snort she said, Princess Ding, aren't you proficient in both civil and martial arts? When did your body become so weak that you can't even drink a cup of tea? Yili smiled at Princess Ronghua and replied, Princess must be joking. However, if there is something wrong with the body, it is natural to have a physician examine it as soon as possible. Concealing one's illness for fear of treatment is not a good thing. What do you think, Princess? Princess Ronghua proudly raised her eyebrows. Picking up the teacup, she took a sip and said, This princess has never heard of someone who cannot drink tea because they are unwell. Enough, Ronghua. Seeing Princess Ronghua being so overbearing, Zhaoyang Princess frowned in displeasure. You are an unmarried girl. Can't you speak properly? What is it like to be so rampant? I am about to be married off to the northern tribes. Who cares if I speak properly? Princess Ronghua angrily said. Finished speaking, she glared at Yili. It was obvious that she had been holding back these words for a long time. Yili smiled bitterly in her heart. The marriage alliance was decided by the emperor. What did it have to do with her? Turning around and handing the teacup to Qingyu, Yili decided not to speak. To the side, Princess Zhaoran could not help but ask, Princess Ding, what are your plans for the marriage alliance candidates? Yili inwardly shook her head. Princess Zhaoran and Princess Ronghua both had the same temperament. Probably because they were born into the imperial family, they were used to being arrogant. Even at this time, their words carried a commanding tone. The emperor's desired candidates are all listed. Yesterday the prince brought them back to the residence. I have not had the time to look at them. I am unable to answer Princess's question. The emperor's desired candidate is Hua Tianxiang. Who doesn't know? Princess Ronghua blurted out. You are clearly trying to exclude her. Do you think that this princess does not know? Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled. She looked up at Princess Ronghua and asked doubtfully, The emperor likes Miss Hua? Since that's the case, why didn't His Majesty directly order young Miss Hua to go to the marriage alliance instead of letting this consort choose a suitable candidate? Since that's the case, since we're all in the palace today, why don't we ask Princess Ronghua to ask the emperor if he really likes Miss Hua? That way, this consort won't be able to pick someone who doesn't meet the emperor's expectations. Princess Ronghua, what do you think? Princess Ronghua was so angry that her face turned white. Although she didn't know much about politics, it didn't mean that she didn't know anything. Why didn't the emperor directly issue a decree for Hua Tianxiang to marry? As a close relative of the imperial family, even if she didn't think of it herself, others would have told her. If she really went to the emperor to ask, she was afraid that she would be the only candidate for the marriage alliance. This Yili actually dared to scheme against her. Just like that woman Ying, no one with the surname Yi was a good person. Princess Ding. Zhaoyang Princess looked at the resentful Princess Ronghua and sighed helplessly. She didn't have any children, and Princess Zhaoran also only had this one daughter, so it was inevitable that she would spoil Ronghua too much. She didn't want to spoil her to have such a domineering and brainless personality. Princess Ding lost her mother when she was young. In terms of age, she was younger than Ronghua by half a year, but Ronghua couldn't compare to her. Ronghua is impatient and doesn't know how to talk. I hope Princess Ding won't blame me. Yili also knew that Princess Zhaoyang Princess had always doted on this niece, so she didn't mind. She smiled and said, Princess, you're exaggerating. In fact, although the emperor gave me the marriage alliance, Princess knows that I'm young and have never dealt with these things. There are many things that I don't understand. So I don't dare to rush to a conclusion. So I can't answer Princess Zhaoran's question right now. Please forgive me. Zhaoyang Princess smiled and said, Princess Zhaoran asked because she was worried about Ronghua. Wang Fei doesn't have to take it to heart. Yang, Prince Ding has come. The palace maid outside the pavilion reported. The empress turned to look at Yili and said with a smile, Everyone says that Prince Ding and Wang Fei are very loving. I didn't believe it at first, but now I do. It's only been a short while and Prince Ding can't wait? Invite Prince Ding over. A short while later, Mo Xiao slowly walked over. He stood outside the pavilion and scanned the people in the pavilion. He smiled faintly and said, Empress, sorry to disturb. The empress smiled and said, Prince Ding has come to take Wang Fei back? Mo Shuyao nodded slightly. He looked at Yi Li with a smile in his eyes and said, Li and I still have some matters to attend to and have to return to the Fu first. So we came to disturb Empress's mood. Please forgive us. The Empress waved her hand and smiled. It's fine. Prince Ding and Wang Fei have not met for a long time. No wonder they are so worried. Today, I also wanted to see if Princess Ding is well after not seeing her for a long time. Now that we have seen her, Prince Ding, please take Wang Fei away. Mo Shuyao gave his thanks in a light voice. He reached out to hold Yi Li's hand and nodded at Zhaoyang Princess before bidding farewell. The two walked hand in hand in the imperial garden. The noble women admiring the flowers in the garden sensibly retreated. Mo Shuyao's body had recovered, but the mask on half of his face still made many people afraid. There had once been a rumor that one of Prince Ding's fiancés had been scared to death by his disfigured face. Also, the present situation at court was delicate. Even if there were people who admired Prince Ding's presence, they would not come up to talk in the imperial garden. Yi Li was naturally in a good mood to be able to leave the imperial palace early. A faint fragrance wafted through the imperial garden. Yi Li leisurely walked beside Mo Shuyao, enjoying this tranquil time. She did not forget to show concern for Mo Shuyao's mood. What is it? What did the emperor say? You don't seem to be in a good mood. Mo Shuyao tilted his head to look at her and asked, What was in the tea just now? Yi Li looked in shock at him. How did he know what had happened in the pavilion so quickly? There should be something like musk and safflower. Qing Yu has gone to investigate. There should be a result when we return. Seeing that his expression was not good, Yi Li still told him everything she knew. She was also curious about what had been put in her tea. Those things did have some effect on the body, but the effect on her was limited. She really did not understand why those people would take the risk to put those things in her tea. Even a laxative would be more effective than those other medicines. Mo Shuyao stopped walking. He tilted his head to look at Yi Li and asked, Yi Li, do you know what the effects of those medicines are? Clearing the meridians and promoting blood flow. Stopping pain. Li, when we return to the Fu, you will study medicine with Mr. Chen for a month. After a moment of silence, Mo Shuyao finally opened his mouth to speak. Medicine? Yi Li's lips twitched. All right, it wasn't that she didn't know that these two medicines had another effect, but at the same time, it was said that it was not reliable. Also, it had no effect on them at all right? Mo Shuyao was angry, but he did not let go of Yi Li's hand. He pulled her out of the imperial garden. Seeing that Mo Shuyao did not speak to her and only continued to walk forward, Yi Li felt that something was strange. She had never seen Mo Shuyao angry before. It should be said that she had never seen Mo Shuyao angry with her before. She tugged at Mo Shuyao's hand that was holding hers. Shuyao. Mo Shuyao tilted his head to look at her. He still did not speak. Yi Li helplessly sighed. Alright, it was her fault. She should not have acted so careless. Chapter 251. Are you really angry? It's not that I don't care, it's just that it doesn't affect us, so I'm not that nervous. Yi Li couldn't help but despise herself in her heart. Mo Shuyao just didn't want to talk to her. What was she trying to explain? Of course she was angry that she was drugged in the palace and she could guess who did it. She had even thought of a return gift. It was just that what the other party drugged her was a bit out of her expectations, so she acted a bit more casual. Why wasn't Mo Shuyao angry at the person who drugged him, but at her instead? Most importantly, why did she have to explain to him as if she was wronged? It doesn't affect you? Mo Shuyao raised Yi Li's beautiful face to look at himself. His deep eyes met with Yi Li's somewhat distressed eyes. Yi Li wasn't used to being in such a disadvantageous position. She struggled uncomfortably and said, Yes, I know that the drug is said to have that effect. But we don't have it. And that statement doesn't seem to be reliable. Besides, I didn't drink it. Was Mo Shuyao really worried that she wouldn't be able to have children in the future after being drugged? Looking at Mo Shuyao's still low pressure, Yi Li thought in hindsight. Li, Prince Ding, Princess Ding, why are you here? Mo Shuyao was just about to speak when a cold female voice covered his voice. The two of them turned around at the same time. Not far away, under a white begonia tree, noble consort Lu, dressed in white, looked like a snow fairy. Noble consort Lu's gaze swept across Yi Li's body indifferently. It stopped on Emo Xiao's body for a moment, and finally fell on their intertwined hands. Emo Xiao didn't seem to care about noble consort Lu's gaze. He nodded indifferently and said, "Noble consort Lu, I and Miss Li will be leaving the palace. Goodbye." A complicated expression flashed across noble consort Lu's cold face. She bit her red lips and looked at Emo Xiao for a long time. Then she looked at Yi Li and said with a slight frown, "Princess Ding, I have something to talk to Prince Ding alone." Yi Li raised her eyebrows in surprise. Shouldn't she ask Emo Xiao if she wanted to talk to Emo Xiao alone? Did noble consort Lu want her to take the initiative to avoid it? She was indeed the most favored imperial concubine in the palace. Just this aura alone was something that other imperial concubines could only look up to. Yi Li was about to speak when Emo Xiao tightened his grip on her hand. Yi Li raised her head and saw Emo Xiao's deep and angry eyes. She had to turn her head to noble consort Lu and say apologetically, "I'm really sorry. Prince and I have something to do, so we have to leave the palace in a hurry. I'm afraid we don't have time to talk to you today." Noble consort Lu frowned and looked at Emo Xiao. Emo Xiao said indifferently, "Goodbye." Noble consort Lu's face turned pale. She clenched her hands tightly under her sleeves. She took a deep look at Yi Li and turned to leave without saying a word. Seeing noble consort Lu leave resolutely, Yi Li looked at Emo Xiao with some worry. She'll be okay, right? Yi Li had of course heard about noble consort Lu's feelings for Emo Xiao. Although as far as Yi Li knew, these two people had never met alone. But it was undeniable that Emo Xiao's merciless rejection made her feel much better. "Let's go back." Emo Xiao pulled her and turned around as if he didn't hear her question. After leaving the palace and returning to the mansion, Yi Li helplessly looked at Emo Xiao, who was still sullen and unwilling to speak, and sighed, "Are you still angry? Was it so difficult to deal with a person who usually didn't like to get angry?" On the way back he didn't say a word. She was used to Emo Xiao's gentle smile and voice. Once he was silent or no longer smiling, Yi Li found herself very uncomfortable. "I know you're worried about me. It's my fault. I shouldn't have been so careless, okay?" Yi Li comforted herself in her heart. He was throwing a tantrum. She couldn't lower herself to the same level as a person who was throwing a tantrum. God knew she really didn't mean to ignore this matter. "Emo Jingqi, you wait for me." Emo Xiao calmly glanced at her, then turned and walked to the side to sit down. Yi Li only felt the veins on her forehead throbbing. She had only heard of men coaxing women. Why was it different when it came to her? "Emo Xiao, do you have to be so childish?" "Fine Yi Li, you have to be magnanimous." "Xiao, you're still angry." "I'll go to the study to deal with today's matter. Let's talk again after you've calmed down." Yi Li, who didn't know how to coax people, had no choice but to retreat. It wasn't that she was impatient or timid, but that Emo Xiao's angry appearance really made her uncomfortable. His usually gentle and elegant handsome face was currently expressionless. He didn't look like he was going to be angry but rather hurt. Seeing this, Yi Li couldn't help but wonder if she had really committed a heinous crime. If this continued, she might have to resort to all sorts of methods to beg for his forgiveness and make him happy. Therefore Yi Li decided to retreat as soon as she sensed danger. "Yi Li." One of her hands was pulled. Emo Xiao used a bit of force to pull the escaping woman back into his embrace. Yi Li was a little embarrassed to find that their current position was a little ambiguous. Emo Xiao sat on the stool and she was pulled into his embrace. She had no choice but to sit on his lap. Although they had shared the same bed for quite some time, their relationship was absolutely innocent. Yi Li couldn't help but feel a little helpless in this situation. "Emo Xiao, can you let go of me first?" Yi Li swallowed her saliva. She wanted to cry but had no tears. She didn't want to appear so useless. No matter who she faced, she could handle it with ease. However, when facing Emo Xiao, she would occasionally doubt her own intelligence. Emo Xiao looked at her quietly. His gaze was deep and sad. "Yi Li, who do you think I am to you?" "Who?" Yi Li wanted to cry but had no tears. She must be crazy to think that Emo Xiao was sad. The most important thing for her to do now was to break free from Emo Xiao and leave as soon as possible. Her intuition as a Special Forces soldier told her that if she stayed any longer, something bad would happen. Didn't we get married a long time ago? Of course I think of you as my husband." His deep eyes blinked. "Then, have we forgotten something?" "Forgotten What? Yili said blankly. Emo Shuyao leaned against her neck. His warm breath blew on her smooth neck. His elegant and clean breath made her feel hot and helpless. Consummate our marriage. Emo Shuyao said softly in her ear. Boom. Yili's mind seemed to have experienced a huge explosion. Her mind went blank. However, Emo Shuyao didn't intend to give her time to think. He lifted her small chin slightly and lowered his head to cover her soft lips. Emo Shuyao. Compared to the kiss outside Shattered Snow Pass, Emo Shuyao was much gentler this time. However, it was this gentleness that made Yili unable to resist. They were probably the only couples who hadn't consummated their marriage after a year of marriage. Yili knew very well that Emo Shuyao was giving her time to mentally prepare herself. However, Yili didn't know if she was ready to accept Emo Shuyao. Or rather, did she fall in love with Emo Shuyao? Chapter 252. Test. Emo Shuyao faintly raised an eyebrow. Qing Yu hurriedly nodded and said, medicines like musk aren't very harmful to ordinary people. It's impossible to achieve the effect of sterilization after 1 or 2 uses. But it is very dangerous for pregnant people. Dr. Shen also said after seeing the tea this servant brought back. If the princess consort is pregnant, just 1 sip of that tea is enough to miscarry. The study was silent for a moment. Emo Shuyao waved his hand. You can leave. You're the only one who understands medicine by Miss Li's side. Be more careful. This servant will leave. Qing Yu secretly sighed in relief. She bowed and hurriedly left. When His Highness was angry, even if he didn't show it on his face, just the low pressure was not something that little girls like them could endure. Qing Yu left. The study was silent. Emo Shuyao's usually gentle and deep eyes were full of haze. Emo Jingqi really knew how to plan ahead. He had just recovered and was already impatient to test Miss Li. Perhaps he also wanted to test if he had truly recovered. Or was he really so confident that he did not dare to touch him? Someone come. Prince. A gray-robed figure appeared in the study. Prince, we've already investigated. It was Wang Xiaorong who had people drug the tea. It is said that when the emperor was favoring Wang Xiaorong, he inadvertently mentioned the princess consort's children. Wang Xiaorong wanted to use this as a pretext to gain favor, so she drugged the tea. Emo Shuyao sneered. It's just Xiaorong. Her people have the ability to drug the empress tea? The gray-robed man naturally did not dare to answer. He also understood that the prince did not want to hear his answer. He only asked, Wang Xiaorong is scheming for the Prince Ding Mansion's children. Prince, should we? Emo Shuyao shook his head. His smile was bone-chilling. Oh, since she likes to drug the tea so much. When I get back, I'll have Qing Yu concoct the medicine according to that cup of tea. I'll watch her drink it for 3 months. Prince, Wang Xiaorong might be pregnant. Do you not understand Ai's words? The gray-clothed man felt a chill in his heart. He hurriedly lowered his head and said, this subordinate obeys. In the bedroom, Yili slowly opened her eyes. The slight discomfort in her body made her frown. Recalling what had happened earlier, the scenes of their passionate entanglement flashed through her mind, and her face, which had become even more beautiful after the pleasure, suddenly flushed red. Yili helplessly patted her cheeks. She wrapped herself in the quilt and shook her head desperately, trying to get rid of the blushing images in her mind. The discomfort in her body made her moan uncontrollably. Yili, you're so useless and embarrassing. Yili couldn't help but grind her teeth as she thought of that bastard who had disappeared to who knows where. If she still couldn't figure out that he had done it on purpose, then she was an idiot. But this idiot had taken it for real at the time. She had panicked when she saw his sad appearance. She had apologized in every possible way but to no avail. She had even lost herself. Although she didn't know where the impulse came from, she didn't oppose it. Li, are you awake? Gentle footsteps came from outside the screen. Yili raised her head to see Emo Shuyao standing at the head of the bed looking at her with a smile. Seeing Emo Shuyao standing in front of her, Yili glared at him and asked, where did you go? Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. He walked to the table and poured a cup of warm water to feed her. Yili quickly reached out to take it and drink it herself. Emo Shuyao didn't mind. He faintly smiled as he sat down by the bed and said, I was afraid of waking you up, so I went outside to look at some things. That's right. Han Mingxi came in the afternoon, so I had him stay in the guest courtyard first. Yili choked and swallowed the water in her mouth before saying, Han Mingxi is here? Why is he so fast? I'll go see him. His warm lips pressed against hers, blocking the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Their lips gently rubbed together for a while. Emo Shuyao took the teacup from her hand and put it to the side. He said in a low voice with a smile, Lily, it's not too late to see him tomorrow. But Yili slightly frowned. Emo Shuyao didn't allow her to refuse. His index finger gently touched her delicate red lips. Li, if you care too much about other men, I'll get jealous. Yili's clear eyes flashed. She looked at him and said, so what if you're jealous? I'll get jealous. Maybe I'll want to kill him to silence him. Emo Shuyao said with a faint smile. Yili raised her eyebrows. So you did it on purpose today? Emo Shuyao didn't deny it. His Lily was simply too smart. There was no point in denying it. I just thought today was a good day. Gently leaning into his embrace, Yili softly sighed and said, as long as you don't betray me, I won't betray you. Even if Emo Shuyao betrays the world, he won't betray Lili. In the end, Yili couldn't win against Emo Shuyao. Someone once said that when you get used to retreating from someone, it's very likely that you'll fall in love with them. Yili wasn't someone who liked to deceive herself. Emo Shuyao was her husband. Other than her blood relatives, he was the closest person to her in this world. She didn't want to deny the fact that she might have fallen in love with Emo Shuyao. Because even when she heard Emo Shuyao's deep words of love, she still felt joy from the bottom of her heart. In this kind of era as a woman, what could make her happier than marrying someone who loved her and was loved by her? Young Master Han. When Yili stepped into the guest courtyard, Han Mingxi was sitting under a magnolia tree in a daze. The purple-red petals that fell in the breeze landed on his moon-white robes, creating a strange luxury. She was used to Han Mingxi wearing a flamboyant red robe no matter where he went. When she looked at the person in front of her, there was a strange feeling of alienation. Han Mingxi came back to his senses. Looking at the graceful woman slowly walking towards him, he couldn't help but be slightly dazed. But he quickly recovered. Junwei, Wang Fei. Yili smiled helplessly and said, I'm not used to hearing you call me that. Han Mingxi raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, even though Wang Fei keeps calling me young Master Han, but I'm not used to it. Also in the future Han Mingxi is Wang Fei's subordinate. If Wang Fei keeps calling me that, wouldn't it be strange? Yili tilted her head and said with a smile, since that's the case, I'll call you Mingxi. You can do as you please. Is the Han family well? Han Mingxi nodded. Han Mingyue has nothing to do with the Han family now. Even if something happens in the future, it won't affect the Han family. That's right, I've already sorted out the Han family's accounts. Wang, do you want to take a look? In the end, he still didn't want to use Wang Fei's distant title. Yili looked at him with some surprise and shook her head, saying, Prince Ding and I don't have any intentions of swallowing up the Han family. Han Mingxi raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, Ding Wangfu is rich enough to rival a country. I naturally understand that Prince Ding doesn't care about the small Han family. But since I've already sworn loyalty, I naturally have to show some sincerity. Yili said with a smile, even if the Han family is truly loyal to the Prince Ding mansion, there's no reason to empty out the Han family. The Han family is still the Han family. The Han family's properties are still surnamed Han. Those accounts give me a headache just looking at them. So Mingxi should take back the Han family's accounts and slowly look at them. Maybe you can talk to an heir and in San Lin Han and Zhuijing. They've also been looking at the accounts recently. Han Mingxi thought for a moment and then nodded with a smile saying, understood. If there's anything you need me or the Han family to do in the future, just let me know. Yili nodded, very good. It just so happens that I have some new collaborations. If you've eaten breakfast, we can go to the study to talk. If you haven't, we can eat breakfast together. Chapter 253. I thought that you should be accompanying Prince Ding to have breakfast? Yili faintly said, Prince Ding's internal energy is profound. He won't feel hungry even if he misses a meal. Thinking of a certain man who was insatiable, Yili lightly snorted in her heart. Not being angry didn't mean that she didn't hold a grudge. Han Mingxi turned back and saw that the woman behind him inadvertently revealed a charm that had never been seen before. His heart darkened as he turned and walked into the room. Then this one will have the honor to invite Princess Ding to have breakfast together. The matter of choosing relatives was pushed back by Yili. Ding Wang Fu still closed its doors to guests and avoided the expected clamor. But there was still an endless stream of invitations sent to the Prince Ding mansion every day. Yili just casually glanced at it before putting it aside for Director Mo and Nurse Sun to handle. An heir and Insan improved rapidly under the joint training of Director Mo and Han Mingxi. Although Han Mingxi had never been in charge of anything before, he was born in a business family and was smart. Even from what he had heard and seen since he was young, he was much stronger than ordinary people. Otherwise, Han Mingyue wouldn't have dared to hand the Han family over to him so confidently. Yi Li's so-called cooperation with the winter holidays was more of Yi Li coming up with an idea and providing a portion of the funds. And the specific operations would all be handled by Han Mingxi. By the time she was almost done with the discussion with Han Mingxi, it was already a matter of several days later. Yi Li thought of the Ding Wang Fu's elites that she had thrown into the valley and didn't know how they were tortured. Looking at the time, she decided to go and see them first. Although Qin Feng didn't stay in the valley with his comrades these few days, his days weren't easy at all. After all, the princess consort had already proposed that the last team would be trained by him. Since that was the case, as the commander, he naturally couldn't be worse than his own subordinates. So that day when he returned to the manor, he went to consult an heir and Insan. It just so happened that Insan was dizzy from all the books in the room and Qin Feng delivered himself to be the punching bag. Insan didn't know how to be polite at all. Every day, the heavy and varied training made Qin Feng, the Black Cloud cavalry commander who was originally full of arrogance and looked down on the Shadow Guard, completely lose his temper. Once again he followed Yi Li to the valley below Black Cloud Peak. Qin Feng had to admit that he was indeed curious as to what had happened to those elites. When they reached the bottom of the cliff, Qin Feng could not help but pinch a few of them when they saw their comrades crawling and rolling in the dust. This was simply too embarrassing for the Black Cloud cavalry and the Mahist army. Yi Li was still sitting on the roof, patiently waiting for the people who were running laps to finish. It wasn't until everyone returned to the yard with dusty faces that she jumped off the roof and asked with a smile, "Elites, how do you feel these days?" The elites' faces were all ashen. They were all expressionless. Could they say they were so tired they wanted to die? If someone had told them in the past that just running and doing some strange exercises could make them collapse from exhaustion, they probably wouldn't have believed it even if they were beaten to death. Who were they? They were the best Shadow Guard and soldiers in the entire Dechu state. How could they be stumped by such a small thing? Now they understood that the reason they felt running was not hard was because they had never seriously run before. In reality, the most unlucky Shadow Guard was so tired on the first day of running that he couldn't even crawl. Looking at the faces of the elites, Yi Li nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, "I've said it before, good martial arts does not mean good health does not mean good stamina, and good stamina does not mean good endurance. After a few days of training, I believe that everyone's stamina and endurance have improved greatly. I hope you can keep it up. In addition, add another 5 miles to your running every day, and add another 100 miles to your other activities." When these words were said, the people below could not help but cry out. Yi Li did not care and continued, "I don't need many of you to become peerless experts. I only need you to become the strongest soldiers. You will be the Mahist army and even the elites of the elites in the entire Dechu state." "Young master, do you mean that we will still return to the army and will still be members of the Mahist army?" Someone below could not help but ask. This was also the doubt of everyone present. Most people were more inclined to think that Prince was preparing to train them to become a more powerful team than the Shadow Guard and the Secret Force. But they did not expect that they would still be soldiers, and from what young Master Chu meant, they would return to the Mahist army in the future. Yi Li said with a faint smile, "I cannot tell you right now, but I can guarantee that in the end, you will all have honorable titles. All of your promotions will be the same as the Black Cloud Cavalry and the Mahist army, or even better. When you reach the age where it is not suitable to stay, or if you are injured in an accident, you will be transferred to a place where the Mahist army or the Prince Ding mansion can reach." Everyone could not help but go into an uproar. Even the Black Cloud Cavalry did not receive this kind of treatment. This made everyone even more curious as to what kind of army they would be. However, this is all on the premise that you can successfully stay here. Although I am a bit surprised that no one has fallen behind in these 7 days, But this is only the beginning. Qin Feng, this is the training plan for the next half a month. Qin Feng looked at the black and white paper as if he was looking at a death sentence. He slowly opened it and took a look. Qin Feng's brows knitted together. Young master, this subordinate doesn't quite understand. Yi Li said with a smile, it doesn't matter if you don't understand. From tomorrow onwards, Zhuo Jing and Lin Han will take turns to watch over them. Before they arrive, you can study the things on the drill ground by yourselves. In fact, the first month will be purely physical training, so I will not control you too much. Tomorrow the 8 experts watching over you will also be leaving, so you will have to rely on yourselves. Also, when you are free, read the books I brought over. Read as much as you can. These will make the next 2 months easier for you. Qin Feng put down the paper in his hand, letting everyone admire it and at the same time have a rough idea of what to do. The soldiers who had been tormented these past few days silently vomited blood. With the addition of some new content, the amount of training was at least 50% more than before. This young master Chu actually wanted to torture them to death, right? What was worse was that before they only needed to complete missions. Now the paper even required them to finish running in a certain amount of time. After these past few days of training, everyone had a rough idea of what to do. The requirements on the paper were too harsh even for these elite soldiers. Young Master Chu, this is impossible to complete. A soldier standing in the front row said in dissatisfaction. Yi Li glanced at him. She raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, impossible? That's right. Without using Qinggong, it is impossible to complete so many missions in such a short time. The smile on Yi Li's face deepened. Black Cloud Cavalry? I've never heard of you relying so much on martial arts. The ones who like to focus on martial arts should be the Shadow Guard. If someone can do it, what do you plan to do? The soldier proudly said, if someone can do it, then we can do it too. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. Very good. Gather at the drill ground. Seeing the soldiers line up and leave, Qin Feng looked worriedly at Yi Li and said in a low voice, Wang Fei? The one you're talking about isn't you, right? He believed that there was someone who could do it. Wang Fei would not deliberately use an impossible mission to tease them. But how could it be the delicate Wang Fei herself? Even though he knew that Wang Fei was very strong, it was just like Wang Fei had said. Good martial arts and good physical strength were two completely different things. And the things written on the paper clearly required physical strength and not martial arts. If something happened to Wang Fei, the prince would definitely cut him down. Chapter 254. Yi Li lowered her head and looked at the clothes on her body. In order to deal with such an unexpected situation, Yi Li had specially worn a suitable set of clothes. After all, she had a lot of experience in training. The reactions of these elites were basically what Yi Li had experienced when she was scolding people and when she was being scolded. Even if she guessed, she could guess a few things. The craftsmen in charge of the construction of this valley were very dedicated. The training field outside the courtyard was completely in line with Yi Li's requirements. A group of unconvinced soldiers stood on the drill ground and stared dumbfoundedly at young Master Chu, who was much taller than them and was also very skinny and weak, running calmly while carrying a few dozen kilograms of weight on his back. In the beginning, no one paid attention. However, when he ran 5 or 6 laps around the training field and his breathing was still stable, everyone finally realized that this young Master Chu was indeed not simple. After 10 laps, young Master Chu did not stop to rest. Instead, he directly rushed to the strange pile of things in the middle of the training field. He climbed over a low net that was covered with iron caltrops and all kinds of sharp objects. He climbed over a net rope that was more than 20 feet high and flipped over a wall that was more than 10 feet high. He grabbed the rope and swung over 20 feet before accurately landing on a piece of wood that was less than half a foot wide and 5 feet high. Under the shocked gazes of everyone, he rushed over as if he was running on flat ground. Finally, he rushed to the finish line. There were already bows and arrows placed there. Yi Li picked up the longbow and pulled the bowstring. She casually shot an arrow right at the center of the target. There was still some fine sand slowly flowing out of the hourglass that was placed at the side. Yi Li turned around and raised her eyebrows at the group of people in front of her. In her heart, she let out a long sigh of relief. Actually, the series of actions last night was still a bit difficult for the current her. Although she had not stopped training herself these past few years, and had been able to train herself without any hindrance after marrying into the Prince Ding mansion for a year. Even so, because of Mo Xiaoyao's guidance, she had made some progress in the ancient martial arts. However, it had been many years since she had completed such a series of actions. Fortunately, it was completed smoothly. If something went wrong in front of these fellows, it would not be easy to teach them a lesson in the future. Yi Li secretly moved her tired and stiff body, but on the surface she smiled calmly. How is it? Good. The crowd was silent for a moment before bursting into cheers. However, what were they thinking before? This young Master Chu in front of them had easily done what they could not do, which was that he was stronger than them. Without a doubt, they all admired the strong. Then, everyone will listen to the instructor's instructions. And let me see your results in half a month? Yes. Young master. Everyone replied in unison. After dismissing everyone, Yi Li's originally smiling expression immediately collapsed. He leaned against the balance beam and sighed bitterly. Qin Feng saw this and raised his eyebrows. This subordinate thought that it would be easy to be the princess consort? Yi Li waved her hand helplessly. No matter how easy it is, it can't withstand not practicing for too long. I'm rusty. I almost fell from the top just now. As expected, I was too busy after coming back. I didn't even have a chance to familiarize myself with the field. But it's nothing. If you really go to the battlefield, who will give you time to familiarize yourself with the field? Qin Feng frowned and said in confusion, Princess, you don't have to work so hard. Yi Li smiled and said, Not really. Compared to testing this and that in the capital, I would rather stay here. If I don't work hard, will those arrogant fellows be convinced? This is just the beginning. In the future, I will have to scare them often to prevent them from being arrogant. Qin Feng couldn't help but rub his forehead. You have already dealt enough blows to them today and you still want to scare them? Think so. I'm about to die from exhaustion. I'll rest for a while before returning home. Yi Li rubbed her arms and turned to walk into the small courtyard. That's right, I don't need to remind you what it means to keep it a secret, right? If the prince knows about what happened today, all your tasks will be doubled. Yes. Princess. After returning to the capital, Mo Xiaoyao was busy dealing with the situation in the imperial court and the emperor's constant probing. Yi Li was busy dealing with the affairs of the prince's mansion and the elite training under the Black Cloud Peak. She put other things aside first. It wasn't until Murong Ting and Leng Haoyu came to visit Yi Li that she remembered that the war in Yongzhou was not over yet. Murong Ting and Leng Haoyu naturally came in the name of visiting Princess Ding. When they were in the border town, Murong Ting finally married Leng Haoyu under Murong Shen's insistence. Now that she had returned to the capital, she had changed from the former eldest miss of General Murong's mansion to the second madam of the Leng family. Mo Xiaoyao definitely had something to do with Murong Ting marrying Leng Haoyu so quickly. For this reason, Yi Li felt a little guilty towards Murong Ting. It wasn't until she saw that Murong Ting was still radiant that she was relieved. It seemed that Murong Ting could still make her happy no matter what the situation was. With Leng Haoyu's infatuation for Murong Ting, he probably wouldn't bully her. Murong, young Master Leng, I'm really sorry for missing your wedding. Looking at Murong Ting, who was still dressed in red and in high spirits, Yi Li smiled apologetically. Murong Ting waved her hand indifferently and said with a smile, What's there to be sorry about? It's all my father's fault for wanting me. As she spoke, she glared angrily at Leng Haoyu, who was sitting beside her. However, there was obviously a different kind of coquettish pout in her eyes that had never been seen before. Leng Haoyu smiled at Murong Ting good-naturedly and didn't refute. Yi Li only shook her head faintly and smiled. Leng Haoyu was able to tolerate Murong Ting's temper so much. It seemed that he was indeed very affectionate. One must know that Leng Haoyu's temper wasn't much. Leaving Mo Xiaoyao and Leng Haoyu to discuss the matter, Yi Li pulled Murong Ting to the side and chatted. Murong Ting looked at Leng Haoyu and Mo Xiaoyao, who were sitting not far away, with some doubts. She wasn't stupid. Although she had been married to Leng Haoyu for less than a month, she still vaguely felt that the private Leng Haoyu was different from the person she used to know. Now that she saw him sitting together with Prince Ding and talking, with a serious and focused expression on his face that she had never seen before, Murong Ting was even more certain in her heart. If Leng Haoyu was really a good-for-nothing playboy, even if it was for Yi Li's sake, Prince Ding would never sit there and talk with him. What's wrong? Murong Ting looked at her with some doubts and said, Li, are you hiding something from me? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at her with a smile. Who do you think is hiding something from you? Murong Ting said with some distress. I feel that Leng Haoyu is different from the person I used to know. Sometimes I wonder if I really know him. Although Leng Haoyu still acted as if he loved to eat, drink and play as usual, he didn't care about worldly affairs. But they were husband and wife. How could Murong Ting not know that Leng Haoyu was busy in the study until midnight? Although no one knew what he was busy with. Yili looked at Murong Ting calmly and asked softly, Murong, do you feel happy after getting married? How are you getting along with second young Master Leng? Chapter 255. Murong Ting was stunned. She blushed slightly and avoided Yili's gaze. She said hesitantly, this doesn't seem to be that bad. Well, they're right. I'll get married sooner or later anyway. He was chosen by father. Although he has been fooling around, father didn't say anything. This means that he shouldn't be that bad. And he's very good to me. Yili smiled. It seemed that second young Master Leng's pestering for so many years was not in vain. Looking back at Leng Haoyu, who was talking to Mo Shuyao not far away and paying attention to this side, Yili said with a smile, since you're so curious, why don't you ask him yourself? Murong Ting said hatefully, he has been pretending to be crazy and stupid in front of me for so many years. Do you want me to ask him now? I don't like it at all. Yili didn't interrupt other couples. She just asked with a smile, have you gotten used to the Leng residence? Murong Ting's face immediately fell. She looked at Yili bitterly and said, not many people in this world are as lucky as you, Yili. Now I know why Leng Haoyu doesn't like the Leng family. It's simply not a place where normal people can stay. Murong Ting was full of resentment at the mention of her newly married in-laws. Now that she finally had someone to talk to, she naturally wouldn't hide it from Yili. She rattled on about what happened in the past few days when she returned to the capital. The Leng family was considered a very famous aristocratic family in the capital. In this generation, Leng Qingyu became the commander of the imperial guards in the capital at the age of 26. He could be said to be the emperor's confidant. Naturally, the entire Leng family had high hopes for him. In contrast, second young Master Leng Haoyu, who was famous for being a playboy, was naturally not valued. But it wasn't until Murong Ting really married into the Leng family that she realized to what extent Leng Haoyu, the second young master, was not valued. Even the servants in the residence who had some reputation dared to gossip about Leng Haoyu. If it weren't for the master's indulgence, how could the servants have such guts? Murong Ting's character had never been one to swallow humiliation. Naturally, she could not stand these people. In the past few days, who knew how much trouble she had caused? However, the mistress of the Leng family, Leng Haoyu's mother in name, had never intended to stand on their side regardless of right or wrong. The fact that the eldest young master of the Leng family, whom Murong Ting adored, ignored and disdained her younger brother made Murong Ting very angry. No matter how careless she was, she could tell that there was no place for Leng Haoyu in the entire Leng residence. If he lived in such an environment, no one would have a good temper. Hearing Murong Ting's complaint, Yili smiled curiously and said, I remember that you used to have a good impression of young Master Leng. In the few times they met, Murong Ting couldn't help but compare Leng Qingyu and Leng Haoyu. Yili had never interacted with Leng Qingyu, but she had heard of this famous cold-faced young master in the capital. However, the Leng family was loyal to the emperor and was obviously not on the same path as the Prince Ding mansion, so there was no need to get in touch with them. Murong Ting lay weakly in the chair and looked at Yili pitifully. Isn't there a saying? You can only see from afar and not play with from close range? In the past, you naturally thought it was good from afar. But if someone despises you from head to toe for 3 meals a day, even if you don't look at them, you won't even look at them. Even when he looks at you like you're dirty, you can't give it to him. Yili raised her eyebrows. Is this how Leng Qingyu treats second young Master Leng? Murong Ting shrugged. In fact, except for Leng Haoyu's father, his whole family treats him like this. I really can't bear to wear that damn place at all. Unfortunately, no matter what, I can't run back to the Murong residence by myself. Otherwise, who knows what rumors will spread if outsiders find out. But Leng Haoyu told me that after the wedding he will tell his father that we will buy a courtyard outside and move out by ourselves. Will General Leng agree? Yili asked. As everyone knew, the Leng family paid great attention to their family style and reputation. Although Leng Haoyu, an unfilial son, often angered old General Leng. The most impressive thing about the Lung family in the capital was that old General Lung was the only one who didn't have a concubine among so many high-ranking officials in the capital. Both of his sons were born by Madame Lung. But at the same time, many people knew that second young Master Lung wasn't Madame Lung's biological son at all. Second young Master Lung's mother was Madame Lung's dowry maid. She passed away after giving birth to Lung Haoyu, so Lung Haoyu was raised under Madame Lung's name since birth. He was also considered the legitimate son of the general's mansion. It was just that Madame Lung spoiled second young Master Lung so much that he became the #1 playboy in the capital. Murong Ting pursed her lips and said, "If Lung Haoyu says there's no problem, then there shouldn't be a problem. I don't want to be dragged along to lament how useless and bastard Lung Haoyu is every morning when I go to greet him." Did those people really think that she, Murong Ting, was a fool? Not to mention that Lung Haoyu wasn't as bad as they said. Even if Lung Haoyu was really a playboy, she was already married. How could she not be able to distinguish between close and distant relatives? At most, she would throw Lung Haoyu into her father's army and let him teach him a lesson. She wasn't interested in discussing how bad her husband was with a group of idle women. Yi Li nodded and looked at Murong Ting with a smile. "It's good that you can trust him. Since second young Master Lung said so to you, it means that he can really solve it. The most important thing between husband and wife is to trust each other." Murong Ting blinked and looked at Yi Li with a smile. "Just like you and Prince Ding?" That time in Yonglin, Prince Ding appeared on the battlefield at a critical moment and happened to save the princess consort. When I was in Yonglin, I heard a lot of people talking about it vividly. I'm afraid that it has spread throughout Jiangnan now. When I was in Yonglin City, those girls were so envious of Princess Ding. Yi Li rolled her eyes helplessly. On the other side, Mo Xiuyao and Lung Haoyu finished their discussion and Lung Haoyu got up and prepared to leave. Although Murong Ting was a little reluctant, she understood that they were all married now, especially Yi Li, who was very busy, so she didn't stay any longer and got up to leave with Lung Haoyu. Lung Haoyu looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was standing at the side, and smiled at Yi Li. "Princess consort, Haoyu heard that the new patriarch of the Han family is now preparing for some hesitant new business. But I don't know if I have a chance to get involved?" Yi Li glanced at Mo Xiuyao and said with a smile, "Second young Master Lung is really well informed." Lung Haoyu didn't care and said with a smile, "As a businessman, I naturally have some business channels. I've embarrassed myself in front of the princess." Yi Li smiled generously and said, "Since young Master Lung is interested, why don't you go and talk to young Master Han? I'm a shopkeeper who doesn't know anything." Lung Haoyu said with a smile, "Princess consort's talent and ideas are always surprising. How can I say that I don't know anything? In that case, I thank Princess consort. Goodbye. I won't see you out." Murong Ting looked at the two of them strangely. She didn't quite understand what business Lung Haoyu wanted to do. Since it was business with the Han family, why did he ask Li? But at least it proved that Lung Haoyu was also planning to do business, right? Chapter 256. After sending off Murong Ting and Lung Haoyu, Yi Li turned back to look at Mo Xiuyao, whose expression was somewhat ugly. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong? Did Lung Haoyu say something that made you unhappy?" Mo Xiuyao reached out and pulled her into his embrace, lightly snorting. What else could it be other than the matter in Yongzhou? Lu Jingyun and Guan Ming, those two trash, had hundreds of thousands of troops under their command, but they were suppressed by Mo Jingli's mere 100,000 people and were unable to fight back. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. 100,000 people? Mo Jingli divided his troops to the east? Mo Xiuyao nodded. That's right. Mo Xiuyao recruited 200,000 troops from Lingzhou. He wanted to occupy the entire south of Yunlong River in the shortest time possible. Originally, it was nothing. But according to the news from Yongzhou, a very powerful person seemed to have appeared in Mo Jingli's army. A few days ago he fought with Lu Jingyun and Guan Ming. Those two trash lost 3 battles. If General Murong hadn't sent reinforcements in time, I'm afraid Yonglin City would have been destroyed in their hands. The emperor is determined not to let the Mahist army go south to quell the rebellion. It's useless even if you're angry. Yi Li raised her hand and patted his arm to comfort him. Mo Xiuyao sighed deeply. I know. Of course he knew that Mo Jingqi would rather give up the entire south of Yunlong River to him than let the Ding Mansion's forces touch it. So now, the situation in the south had become a situation where they couldn't win the battles. The two trash had hundreds of thousands of troops but had no military achievements. As for the Prince Ding mansion, since Mo Xiuyao had arrived in time, no matter how much they hoped to lead the troops to the south, they could only watch anxiously from the sidelines. Lu Jingyun has never fought a battle, let alone lead hundreds of thousands of troops. That Guanming is also a trash. General Zhengguo was not feeling well and was recuperating at home. Old Duke Hua was old and did not have the emperor's trust. Not to mention the generals under the command of the Prince Ding mansion. I'm afraid that even if Mo Jingli takes over the entire south, His Majesty won't let them onto the battlefield. Yili thought in a low voice. Mo Xiuyao said in a low voice, with General Murong looking after that trash, as long as he doesn't act smart, he should be able to hold on for a few months. But once Mo Jingli truly takes over the south and turns around to deal with him, it will be his death. Yili frowned. With Mo Jingli's speed, you should still be in the northern tribes by then, right? Mo Xiuyao shook his head and snorted with anger. Forget it, if they want to mess around, let them mess around. I don't have time to pay attention to them right now. Mo Jingqi has something to do, so he won't have to keep staring at the Prince Ding mansion. Yili smiled helplessly. I'm afraid that no matter how many things he has to do, he won't forget about the Prince Ding mansion. Since he likes to stare at the Prince Ding mansion, I'll let him stare as much as he wants. Let's go out for a walk. With one hand around Yili's slender waist, Mo Xiuyao chuckled softly and turned to lead her out. Yili looked out at the sky in confusion. It's getting dark, where are you going? Mo Xiuyao smiled. You'll know when we get there. Walking in the endless stream of people, Yili, who had lived in the Chu capital for so many years, never knew that the Chu capital could be so lively at night. This was not a place that the rich and powerful of the capital liked to visit. Instead, it was a street where the common people gathered. At night, when the lanterns were lit, the sides of the street were filled with all kinds of simple and exquisite lanterns. On the street, people were walking in twos and threes, laughing and laughing. It really was a peaceful and happy scene. Yili lowered her head to look at the two's intertwined hands. Even though there were lanterns everywhere, they were not as bright as during the day. Most of the people on the street were common people, so the two of them did not attract much attention as they walked in the crowd. At most, people would occasionally look at the mask on Mo Xiuyao's face and exclaim at the two's appearance. What day is it today? Looking at the joyous crowd, Yili leaned into Mo Xiuyao's embrace and asked curiously. Mo Xiuyao raised his hand and carefully protected her in his embrace. He said softly with a smile, "It's not a special day. Every month there is a night market in the capital. On this day the curfew will be 2 hours later than normal. So this is also a lively day in the capital. This is a tradition in the capital. Does Li not know?" Yili was silent. She really did not know that there was such a day in the capital. Mo Xiuyao turned his head to look at her and said with a smile, "Playing with these common people is completely different from playing with those rich and powerful people. When I was young, I would come here almost every month. So I always wanted to bring you here to see it." Yili raised her head to look at him and said with a faint smile, "Then if we have time in the future, we can come here every month as well. It's really boring in the capital." Looking at Yili's beautiful face under the lights, Mo Xiuyao pulled her into his embrace and leaned against her shoulder as he gave a low laugh. "All right, if Lili likes it, we can come here every month." The passers-by saw a handsome and outstanding man carefully protecting a delicate and graceful woman in his embrace. Looking at the woman's clothes and hair, she was clearly a married woman. In the eyes of the crowd, this couple must be a newly married couple. They could not help but reveal a kind smile. Mo Xiuyao held Yi Li's hand as he walked through the crowd with great familiarity. Although he had not been here for many years, the Lantern Festival did not seem to have changed much. Mo Xiuyao still found his target with great familiarity. It was a small stall selling lanterns that looked simple and crude. The stall owner was an old man with white hair. He was currently carefully hanging the lanterns one by one on the side. But the old man was not young. He held up a beautiful lotus flower lantern and shakily tried several times, but was unable to hang it to the highest point. Mo Xiuyao stood to the side and reached out to take the lantern from the old man's hands and hang it up. The old man was stunned at first. He turned his head and saw a noble and extraordinary man and woman standing in front of him. The old man looked at Mo Xiuyao and could not help but frown. "Many thanks to young master. This young master looks somewhat familiar. This old man seems to have seen young master somewhere before. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly. In the past few years I often came here and bought many lanterns from old Mr. No wonder old Mr. found me familiar. The old man waved his hand uneasily. This old man does not deserve the word Mr. Is young master bringing his wife to the lantern festival? Do you want to buy a lantern to play with? The word wife clearly made Emo Shuyao very happy. He turned his head to look at Yili and pointed to a pile of simple lanterns. I'll take these two. The old man looked at the two with some difficulty. Although the clothes of these two young masters and madams were not very extravagant, the old man had sold lanterns for most of his life. He had seen many people come and go. He could tell at a glance that these two were nobles. No matter how he looked at it, they did not look like people who would be interested in such simple lanterns. Yili also understood the old man's thoughts. She smiled faintly and said, I'll take these two. They look simple and elegant, but they are also unique. The old man saw that the two of them seemed to really want these two simple lanterns. He nodded and took the lanterns and handed them over. Yili took them in her hands. They were indeed very ordinary lanterns. The workmanship could be considered exquisite, but compared to the other strange flowers and birds, they were only average. Even the paper on the outside was made from ordinary white paper and some flowers were pasted on. Perhaps these two were made from the leftover materials after making other lanterns. Emo Shuyao took the lantern in Yili's hands and looked at it. He smiled at her and turned to pick up the brush and ink that the old man had placed at the side. After a moment he stopped and nodded with satisfaction. He handed the lantern back to Yili. Yili lowered her head to take a look. She used the blank space on the original flower painting to draw a graceful woman. Some were holding scrolls, some were frowning, some were holding flowers, and some were holding swords. Although it was only a few strokes, it made people feel that the woman's graceful and beautiful appearance was vividly displayed on the paper. The originally monotonous and boring flower lantern suddenly became an exquisite and beautiful flower lantern. Chapter 257. Yili looked at the lantern in her hand, then looked at the other lantern on the side. She pursed her lips and smiled. She took the brush and began to draw on the other lantern. She clearly took longer than Emo Shuyao, but Emo Shuyao did not mind. He patiently stood to the side and waited for her to finish. When Yili handed the finished lantern to him, Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows in surprise. On the lantern, there was a man holding a spear and riding a horse with an extraordinary aura. Yili did not draw many words like Emo Shuyao did. The only thing on the painting was the man on the horse with an imposing aura like a god of war. This was the scene outside Yonglin City that day. Emo Shuyao looked at the lantern in his hand, the smile on his face deepened. Was I like this in Li's eyes at that time? Yili blushed slightly. She picked up her own beautiful lantern. My painting is not as vivid as Gongzi's. If you don't like it, then forget it. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, How could I not like it? I will definitely keep it well. Looking at the person on the lantern, Emo Shuyao's eyes were filled with joy. He never knew that in Ali's eyes he had such an extraordinary aura and sharp aura. After taking out some money to pay the old man who was watching the two of them draw their own lanterns, Emo Shuyao once again held Yili's hand and walked forward. The old man who was lost in thought looked down at the money in his hand that was worth an entire night of buying lanterns. His eyes flashed as he suddenly thought of something. His expression became excited. It's. In the end he did not say what it was. The old man looked at the pair of figures that were gradually disappearing into the distance. A few years ago, there was also a high-spirited youth in embroidered clothes. Every month he would come here to buy lanterns. But every time the youth would only pick the most ordinary and worst one. But every time he would give him enough money to buy a good lantern. After a long time he realized that the young man had chosen the worst one because he was young and alone. He was worried that the bad ones wouldn't sell. However, that youth from a few years ago had never appeared again. Both of them had good hearing and extraordinary skills. Naturally, they heard the old man's mutterings after taking a few steps. Yili glanced at Emo Shuyao and said with a smile, Prince, your identity has been seen through. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly, It's nothing. I used to come here often, but I didn't expect that old mister to recognize me. Emo Shuyao's life could be said to have been divided by the time he was 17 years old. From then on he was in two completely different directions. If they weren't familiar with each other, it would be difficult to connect the two of them together. Yili lowered her head to look at the freshly painted lantern in her hand, which was still emitting the fragrance of ink, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. The two of them carried lanterns and strolled leisurely along the streets with many other young men and women. Their extraordinary appearance and temperament attracted many curious and envious gazes, but compared to the probing and calculating gazes of the nobles in the palace, it made them feel much better. Yili walked as she curiously looked at the various small stalls on both sides of the street. The things sold there weren't all that good. They were all for the common people. Although they were simple and unadorned, they made people feel closer to nature. Emo Shuyao smiled as he pulled Yili to a stall selling jewelry, rouge and face powder. The small stall naturally didn't have anything valuable. The middle-aged couple who set up the stall could see that the man and woman in front of them were not ordinary people. Although they might not be interested in their things, they still tried to sell them. Emo Shuyao picked up an elegant pearl hairpin and looked at Yili. He shook his head and put it back. A slender hand picked up the hairpin again and met Emo Shuyao's eyes. Yili raised an eyebrow and asked with a smile, "What is it?" Emo Shuyao sighed softly and said, "This hairpin will only be overshadowed by Li. Li is suited for the brightest pearls. A few days ago I ordered some luminous pearls from Fenghua Tower. Tomorrow let's go see what style you like, Li." Yili held the simple hairpin in her hand and looked at it. She smiled and said, "Even if you aren't afraid that I will squander all your family's wealth, I'm afraid that the noble ladies in Jing will kill me with their gazes." Fenghua Tower's jewelry was famous in the Chu capital for being expensive. Even if the noble ladies had a few pieces, it would be worth showing off. But others did not know, but Yili knew. Ever since her wedding, almost all of her jewelry had been ordered from Fenghua Tower. It was no wonder that even though Yili rarely went out and would try to choose some low-key jewelry, there were still many people who would pay attention to the jewelry she wore. If you can squander all your family's wealth just by buying a few pieces of jewelry, then it can only be said that our family's wealth is too thin. Emo Shuyao said with a smile. He took the hairpin from Yili's hand and gently put it on for her. He said softly, "I hope that Li gets the best." Yili smiled faintly and said, "If you like it, then it's the best. If you don't like it, then it's worthless no matter how good it is." A faint smile flashed through Emo Shuyao's eyes. He asked in a low voice, "Then does Li like it?" It was just a simple like. She didn't know if he was talking about the hairpin or something else. Yili blushed slightly. She turned her face and said in a low voice, "It's not bad." After paying, they listened to the compliments of the couple who had set up the stall. The two of them did not pay it any mind. They held hands and turned to leave. As they walked, Emo Shuyao turned his head to look at the woman next to him. The inconspicuous pearl hairpin seemed to sparkle with a moving light in her black hair. "What's going on over there?" Yili looked ahead. There was a lot of noise in that direction. Most of the people were moving in that direction. At a glance, she could only see a dense crowd. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, "There's probably something going on. Let's go take a look and we'll know." Handing the two lanterns to the person following behind them, Emo Shuyao pulled Yili towards the crowd. Yili turned her head to look at the unfamiliar guard holding the two lanterns. She frowned and said, "I almost forgot. Ever since I came back I haven't seen Ajin." Ajin had always been a man of few words. Even when he was at Emo Shuyao's side, he was expressionless as he pushed the wheelchair. Now that Emo Shuyao's legs were fine, Ajin seemed to have been forgotten. Emo Shuyao turned his head and said with a smile, "I told him to do something else. He's grown up. He can't always be by my side as a guard." Yili nodded. Ajin was Chief Steward Mo's nephew. Chief Steward Mo had worked hard for the Wang Fu and had no children. Ajin's parents had also died for the Prince Ding mansion. Emo Shuyao should take extra care of Ajin. After squeezing into the crowd, they saw that there was a stage set up at the corner of the street. The stage was decorated with colorful satin, making it look bright and eye-catching. There was no one on the stage, but the crowd below the stage was clearly excited. Yili looked at the middle-aged man beside her whose face was red with excitement. She asked softly, "What's going on here?" The middle-aged man turned his head and saw a beautiful woman standing beside him. He couldn't help but be surprised. He said with a pleasant expression, "The #1 courtesan in the capital, Miss Yao Ji, is going to dance here." And she's going to throw the embroidered ball. Halfway through, he seemed to remember that the person in front of him was a beautiful woman. The man's face turned red and he didn't say much. Even though he didn't say it clearly, it didn't stop Yili from understanding. Slightly surprised, Yili turned her head to look at Emo Xiaoyao in confusion and asked, "The Miss Yao he's talking about isn't the one I know." Chapter 258. It seems to be true, Emo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. Yili frowned. Although she had only seen Yaoji twice, she had a good impression of the woman. Speaking of which, Yaoji was not only a dancer, but also the owner of the number 1 Qingqing Lane in the capital. Although a dancer was a lowly person, Yaoji's family was probably not inferior to some rich businessmen in the capital. Such a woman obviously didn't need to throw an embroidered ball to find a groom or choose a guest. Moreover, she chose this place. Although there were many people here, most of them were ordinary people. If Yaoji wanted to choose an ordinary person to live with, she shouldn't be so high profile. Seeing her frown, Emo Xiaoyao said with a faint smile, "It is said that Yaoji and Mu Yang have a close relationship. Next month, Mu Yang will marry the granddaughter of Minister's son of the Ministry of Rights. I don't know if this has anything to do with it." Yaoji and Mu Yang? Yili still remembered that she had seen Mu Yang 2 or 3 times. Although they didn't talk, she could see that he was an extremely outstanding man from afar. Yili had also heard the rumors about Yaoji, Mu Yang and Feng Zhiyao. However, with her understanding of Feng Zhiyao, this rumor was probably exaggerated. She didn't expect that Feng Zhiyao was a fake and Mu Yang was a real one. Emo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "Yaoji was famous in the capital when she was 13 years old. It has been nearly 10 years since then. If it weren't for Feng San and Mu Yang's protection, it wouldn't be so easy for a weak woman like her to support Qingqing Lane and not be harassed by influential people. Those powerful people in the capital aren't easy to deal with." Yili nodded. Yaoji's beauty was definitely in the top 5 in the capital. More importantly, compared with the graceful and dignified appearance of ordinary rich ladies, Yaoji, who was skilled in singing and dancing, had a different kind of seductive and enchanting temperament. Such a stunning beauty was still in the midst of the dust. How could she not be the target of those high officials, dignitaries and playboys? Even though Yaoji was a clean woman, how could a powerless and weak woman resist those wild bees and butterflies without anyone's help? Yili couldn't understand Yaoji's idea. Even if it was really related to Mu Yang, it was too irresponsible to decide her future in this way. If it was a martial arts competition or a literary competition, they could at least test the other party's ability. However, throwing the embroidered ball was completely a gamble of luck. Yili still vaguely remembered some TV dramas she had seen in her previous life where a rich young lady threw an embroidered ball and caught it by a beggar. Yaoji deliberately chose such a place. Even if she would not be picked up by beggars, it was more likely that she would be picked up by ordinary people. However, even if an ordinary person were to marry Yaoji legally, there would be no benefits for either side. "Don't worry, there's no way Mu Yang wouldn't know about this," Emo Xiaoyao said softly. Yili nodded and looked around. Unfortunately, she didn't see Mu Yang. The matter between a man and a woman was hard to say. No matter whether Mu Yang would appear here or not, no one could say whether he was right or wrong. After all, he was going to get married next month. Not only did he have to be responsible for Marquis Mu Yang's household, he also had to be responsible for his fiancée. "Miss, is this your brother or?" The man standing beside Yili suddenly asked in a low voice. Yili looked back and found that many men around were looking at Emo Xiaoyao with unkind eyes. She couldn't help but smile. Although Emo Xiaoyao was wearing a mask, the exposed half of his face was still handsome. Moreover, his posture was outstanding. Standing in the crowd, he stood out. How could the surrounding men not be hostile? Holding Emo Xiaoyao's hand, Yili smiled faintly and said, "We're just watching. My husband won't snatch it." Everyone's eyes were obviously filled with disbelief. Although the woman in front of them was not inferior to Miss Yaoji, no man would dislike having more beautiful women. This girl was elegant and noble. Obviously, she was the wife of a noble family. Wasn't she just lacking an enchanting and charming concubine like Miss Yaoji to enjoy the fortune of being surrounded by beauties? Emo Xiaoyao was in a good mood and didn't care about the rudeness of these people. He pulled Yili in front of him and smiled at the man who asked the question. "Don't worry. I'm not here to snatch the embroidered ball. My wife is very fierce." Yi Li's face suddenly darkened. She reached out her hand and pinched him hard. Mo Xiuyao's expression was as usual, as if Yi Li didn't pinch his flesh. He smiled at the man opposite him and said, "And I don't like women who are too enchanting. I prefer a gentle and graceful woman like my wife." The gentle and graceful woman secretly picked up a bit of flesh on his waist and pinched hard. Mo Xiuyao helplessly smiled bitterly. He raised his hand and pressed Yi Li's hand. "Wife, I really don't like other women." Yi Li rolled her eyes and silently let go. What was that saying again? Hooligans were not scary, but hooligans with culture were scary. No one could resist a person who was usually gentle and elegant when he was thick-skinned. The men around finally seemed to be relieved. They all gave Mo Xiuyao an understanding smile. Mo Xiuyao didn't stand on ceremony. He smiled and nodded, accepting the kindness of the people one by one. "Oh, Miss Yaoji has come out," someone exclaimed. Yi Li looked back. The beautiful woman on the stage was wearing a colorful dress. Her makeup was stunning and her smile was enchanting. She caused an uproar as soon as she appeared. Yaoji nodded slightly to the audience and smiled sweetly. The men under the stage were so excited that they shouted one after another. Yaoji's eyes swept over the place where Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao were standing. He was slightly stunned. She smiled faintly at Yi Li and then turned around and waved her long sleeves. The music on the side of the stage sounded leisurely. Yaoji slowly swayed her waist and danced with the music. The audience applauded again. Yi Li frowned. She looked at the woman on the stage with a bright smile and sighed secretly. Yaoji didn't want to throw the embroidered ball. She was simply deliberately ruining her reputation. Yaoji's reputation in the capital was not bad. Although it was said that she had an ambiguous relationship with Feng San and Mu Yang, it was only a rumor. No one had really seen her. Besides, not many people could see Yaoji in person. But now she was dancing and throwing the embroidered ball in such a place. Probably after today, more than half of the men in the capital would know what Yaoji looked like. Today, whether it was the high officials and dignitaries who wanted to marry her as a concubine or the ordinary people who wanted to marry her as a wife, their opinion of her would be lowered to a lower level. Looking up at the sadness that flashed across the woman's face on the stage, Yi Li shook her head secretly. Was it really because of Mu Yang? When the song was over, the people under the stage shouted one after another, urging Yaoji to throw the embroidered ball quickly. A middle-aged woman with makeup and a smile on her face came to the stage. She raised her hand to signal the audience to be quiet and said with a smile, "You are lucky today. Today Miss Yaoji personally threw the embroidered ball to choose a groom. The one who catches the embroidered ball is our Miss Yaoji's groom tonight. I wish you good luck here." Yi Li's heart sank. She heard clearly what the procuress said about the groom tonight. That was to say, Yaoji didn't really want to marry but just wanted to choose a groom. It also meant that after tonight, Yaoji would no longer be a stripped-down dancer who only sold her skills but not her body. Looking at the beautiful woman with bright eyes standing on the stage, Yi Li sighed regretfully. Mo Xiuyao asked in a low voice, "What's wrong, Miss Li?" Chapter 259. Yi Li shook her head and said, "Miss Yaoji's action is too decisive." "Why do you have to?" Yi Li was asked if she could go to this extent for a man. Yi Li knew very well that she absolutely could not do what Yaoji did. It was not because she didn't love him, but her love had a bottom line. If she could even abandon her dignity, this kind of love would be too heavy for Yi Li. Mo Xiuyao leaned over to Yi Li's ear and whispered, "I will never let Li be like this. I will remove all obstacles and let Li be Mo Xiuyao's only wife." Yi Li raised her eyebrows. "Prince is very good at saying nice things today. You like it? I will say it every day." Mo Xiuyao smiled. "Don't worry. Muyang is a little stupid but he is kind. He will definitely come." Yi Li nodded. So what if he came? Muyang would never marry Yaoji, nor would he give up Marquis Muyang's mansion for Yaoji. And Miss Sun, she was also the most innocent one. On the stage, Yaoji was holding a colorful embroidered ball and looking at the audience with a smile. The men under the stage all stared at the small embroidered ball excitedly. As long as they got it, they could spend a night with the best dancer in the capital. It was absolutely a great temptation for these ordinary men who would only look at Yaoji once. Yaoji's eyes fell on Yi Li. She raised her eyebrows and smiled sweetly at her. Yi Li frowned and had a bad feeling in her heart. Before she could figure it out, Yaoji raised the embroidered ball and threw it in her direction. The crowd exclaimed, and those who were far away could only curse in frustration. Those who were close all stared at the embroidered ball in the air and raised their hands high to catch the good luck falling from the sky. From the moment Yaoji raised her hands, Yili knew where she wanted to throw it. Of course, Yaoji didn't want to throw the embroidered ball to herself, but to Emo Shuyao who was standing behind her. After the embroidered ball left her hand, Yaoji raised her eyebrows and moved her lips silently. Although there was no sound, it wasn't difficult for Yili who was good at lip reading. What she said was, "Do you think he'll accept it?" Yili cursed in her heart. She turned around and wanted to pull Emo Shuyao away. Normally with their skills, they wouldn't have to worry about not being able to avoid a small embroidered ball. But now the two of them were surrounded by people. It was difficult for them to even move their feet, let alone avoid it. Emo Shuyao lowered his head to look at Yili who was tugging at his collar and chuckled. He raised his hand and slapped the embroidered ball that was flying towards him. The embroidered ball immediately changed direction and flew to the other side. As the embroidered ball deviated from its direction, the crowd rushed to the other side. Emo Shuyao held Yili in his arms to protect her from being squeezed by the crowd. He asked with a smile, "Were you nervous just now, Miss Li?" Yili snorted and raised her head to look at the stand. Yaoji didn't look disappointed when she saw her embroidered ball being slapped away. Instead, she smiled more charmingly at Yili and said silently, "Congratulations." Yili nodded slightly and accepted her congratulations. The colorful embroidered balls were fought over in the crowd. Often, before a person could grab them, they would be slapped away or taken away by the person next to him. The fierceness of the fight for the embroidered balls was amazing. It was just a small embroidered ball. No matter how many people fought for it, it couldn't be fought over endlessly. Just when a burly man who thought he was better than others reached out to grab the embroidered ball, an outstanding figure stepped on the shoulders of the crowd and flew over. He kicked away the burly man's hand and at the same time, kicked the embroidered ball towards the woman standing on the stage. In the disappointed exclamation of everyone, a swift figure quickly flew onto the stage and caught the embroidered ball before it fell on Yaoji. On the stage, a young man dressed in a brown brocade robe was standing leisurely beside Yaoji. His handsome face was angular, and he looked more boorish and straightforward than the men from Great Chu. However, the sharp gleam in his eyes, which seemed to be smiling, made people know that he was not one of those warriors who were all brawn and no brains. The man casually played with the embroidered ball in his hand. He smiled at the man who had fallen into the crowd below the stage and said, "Since you don't like Miss Yaoji, you can just stand aside and watch. It's rude to kick her embroidered ball back like this. It's said that Dechu State is a land of literature and etiquette. You're too rude to the beauty." The man in the crowd, Mu Yong, the heir of Marquis Muyong's household, flew onto the stage with a sullen face. He didn't say a word and slapped the man in brown. The man in brown was obviously prepared and easily dodged to the side. The two of them fought back and forth on the stage. The people below the stage also cheered. Since he couldn't get the beauty's favor, he didn't lose anything by watching the show. Ordinary people didn't have much, so it wasn't easy for them to have too many obsessions. Yili leaned in Emo Shioyao's arms and curiously looked at the man fighting with Mu Yong on the stage. She could tell from his appearance that he was definitely not from Dechu State. "He's from the northern tribes?" Yili didn't have a good impression of the northern tribes. The last time was at the wedding last year. The 13th prince of the northern tribes had left a very bad impression on her. This time he was in the mood to come to this kind of place to play. Emo Shuyao smiled. Previously, there was news that the northern tribes had sent someone to escort the bride to Dechu State. "I didn't expect him to arrive in the capital so quickly." Yili raised her eyebrows and turned to look at him. "You know him?" "Yelu Yi, the 7th prince of the northern tribes." Emo Shuyao said in a low voice. "Mu Yong probably isn't his match." Yili nodded slightly. She could tell from just a few moves. Mu Yang's martial arts were not bad, but it couldn't compare to Yelu Ye's, which was obviously honed on the battlefield. Mu Yang couldn't be blamed. Although Dechu State worshipped martial arts, it also worshipped literature. Most influential families tended to let their children walk the path of an official rather than the battlefield. After all, swords have no eyes on the battlefield. Who knows when you might lose your life? Mu Yang was able to cultivate both literature and martial arts at such a young age. It wasn't easy for him to have such achievements in martial arts. But the northern tribes was completely different from the Dechu state. Although they were influenced by the culture of the Central Plains, their culture was still valiant and the strong were respected. And Yelu Yi was one of the most outstanding sons of the northern tribes. Naturally, he had risked his life on the battlefield since he was a teenager. After less than 100 moves, Mu Yang started to lose ground. And Yelu Yi was clearly in high spirits. The more he fought, the braver he became. His fierce attacks forced Mu Yang to retreat again and again. Yili looked at Imo Shuyao and couldn't help but frown. She didn't want to let Imo Shuyao go on stage. No matter if he won or lost, there would be a storm in the end. But at the same time, whether it was her or Imo Shuyao, they couldn't watch Yelu Yi injure Mu Yang. Yaoji was originally a bit absent-minded, but when she saw that Mu Yang was about to lose, she finally came back to her senses. She said in a flustered and exasperated tone, "I told you to meddle in other people's business. I'm running my embroidered ball, what does it have to do with you?" Yelu Yi laughed loudly. "Miss Yaoji is right. Young Master Mu, since you kicked the embroidered ball back, what is the meaning of this now?" Chapter 260. Mu Yang glanced at Yaoji, still silently dealing with Yelu Ye's relentless attacks. Even those below the stage who don't know martial arts can see he's having a hard time. Yelu Yi coldly snorted, seeming to have finally lost his patience. He laughed. "Since the heir has nothing to say, then don't disturb this one's intimacy. Go." With a low shout, Yelu Ye's palm slapped towards Mu Yang's chest. This palm's momentum is forceful, clearly with the power to split mountains and split rocks. Standing on the side, Yaoji couldn't help but cover her mouth and scream, "No." The stage itself isn't big. Yaoji is also close to the two. Seeing Mu Yang in danger, Yaoji cried out in alarm and used all her strength to throw herself forward. She's been practicing martial arts since she was a child. Her body's agility doesn't lose to ordinary martial arts practitioners. In this moment of desperation, she actually threw herself between Mu Yang and Yelu Yi. Yelu Ye's palm was about to hit Yaoji's body. The audience below the stage couldn't help but close their eyes, not daring to watch. Just now when the two fought, the things on the stage were smashed to pieces. If this palm landed on Yaoji's body, a delicate beauty like her would immediately die. Whoosh, a lustrous light flashed by. Yelu Yi only saw a lustrous light flash in front of his eyes. He quickly withdrew his palm and retreated several steps back. Yaoji's face was deathly pale, falling right into Yelu Ye's arms. She originally closed her eyes and waited for death, but found that the palm didn't hit her. Opening her eyes, she just happened to see Mu Yang's eyes containing worry and anger. Thinking about the two's current situation, her heart darkened and she stood up to leave. Yelu Yi stood with his hands behind his back, glancing sideways at the pearl hairpin nailed to a pillar. Although it's just an ordinary silver pearl hairpin, the entire hairpin is deeply embedded, leaving only a pearl flower on the outside. It's clear the opponent's skill is profound. If he didn't withdraw his palm in time, Yelu Yi believes this hairpin would have pierced his wrist. Looking back at the source of the concealed weapon, he saw a young man and woman dressed in simple yet elegant clothes. The woman was elegant and graceful, but there was an air of elegance and nobility about her that was different from the women of Dechu state. The man's face was covered by a mask, but his moon-white robes made him seem like a bright moon. He was cultured and refined, but in fact he was extraordinary. Raising his brows, Yelu Yi chuckled. "This young master already has a beauty in his arms. Could it be that you're still interested in Miss Yaoji?" Imo Shuyao smiled faintly and said, "Prince Yelu must be joking. My wife is pure and kind by nature. She can't stand the sight of blood. It doesn't matter if the prince doesn't know how to control his strength on a whim, but it wouldn't be good if he scared my wife." Hearing this, Mu Yang turned his head in surprise. Seeing Imo Shuyao and Yi Li in the crowd, he couldn't help but stare blankly. He nodded slightly, not opening his mouth to expose the two's identities. Yelu Yi didn't expect his identity to be exposed. Narrowing his eyes, he sized up Imo Shuyao and Yi Li. After a while he smiled and said, "So I didn't expect to see Prince and Princess here. It's really a pleasure." Imo Shuyao said indifferently, "I also didn't expect to see Prince Yelu in this kind of place." Yelu Yi smiled but didn't say anything. avoiding Emo Xiao's question of him sneaking into the Chu capital. Pointing at Yaoji, he said with a smile, "Since Prince doesn't intend to fight over Miss Yaoji, does that mean Miss Yaoji still belongs to me? Don't even think about it," Mu Yang said in a low voice, walking in front of Yaoji and shielding her behind him. Yelu Yi sneered disdainfully, looking at Mu Yang with a smile that wasn't a smile. Why doesn't Shitzi Mu ask Miss Yaoji's opinion? Perhaps Miss Yaoji is more willing to choose the stronger one? Yaoji silently walked out from behind Mu Yang. Under Mu Yang's shocked gaze, she walked behind Yelu Yi. Yaoji. Yaoji smiled faintly, but her expression was a bit bitter. She said softly, "Today's rules were set by Yaoji, so Yaoji naturally has to abide by them. I've troubled Shitzi Mu to make a trip here, so it can be considered as completing our friendship over the years. Shitzi Mu, please go back." Mu Yang stared at her stunning face, not saying a word for a long time. The smile on Yaoji's face gradually stiffened. Finally, she turned around and didn't confront him. At this time, the sky was already dark, close to the curfew. The people below the stage saw that there was no more excitement to watch, so they all left in disappointment. On the stage, Yelu Yi smiled at Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao. "Prince, Princess, today's meeting is also fate. How about we find a place to drink a cup of wine and catch up?" Emo Xiuyao led Yi Li over, smiling faintly. "Prince Yelu has a beauty in your arms, yet you still have the mood to catch up with I?" Yelu Ye's eyes flashed with sharpness. He smiled and said, "My good-for-nothing younger brother accidentally offended Prince last year. Fortunately, Prince was magnanimous and didn't pursue the matter, allowing him to safely return to the northern tribes. This little prince was just about to personally thank Prince." Emo Xiuyao nodded magnanimously. "Those who come are guests. I'm not a petty person. Prince Yelu doesn't need to take this small matter to heart." Emo Xiuyao didn't have the slightest bit of guilt for making the already foolish Yelu Ping even more foolish. In fact, to be able to let him return alive, Emo Xiuyao felt that his self-cultivation these past few years was not bad. Yelu Yi choked, wishing he could slap Emo Xiuyao to death. If Emo Xiuyao had directly killed Yelu Ping, perhaps he wouldn't be so angry. But he sent Yelu Ping to his sworn enemy, the Crown Prince. Not only that, he also let people leak information to him. He was worried that Yelu Ping would leak some of his secrets to the Crown Prince, so he could only use all his means to get him back from the Crown Prince, who knew that the person he saved was a fool who didn't know anything. Of course, he absolutely believed that Emo Xiuyao had already dug out everything he knew before he made Yelu Ping stupid. If half of the people of the Ding King's Fu were left in this world, it would be a disaster. "Fuang didn't lie to me. This is Princess Ding. This one is the 7th prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Yi. Wang Fei greets you." Knowing that he couldn't win against Emo Xiuyao, Yelu Yi didn't make things difficult for himself. He cleanly changed the target and smiled at Yi Li. Yi Li stood next to Emo Xiuyao and said with a light smile, "Prince Yelu greets you." Yelu Yi impudently examined Yi Li and said, "On the way to the Chu capital, I heard that Wang Fei is a woman who doesn't lose out to men. I thought you were such a graceful beauty. Prince Ding really has good fortune." Emo Xiuyao's eyes darkened, a trace of anger flashing past but quickly disappearing. He smiled at Yelu Yi and said, "Prince Yelu praises me too much. This isn't the place to talk. Prince Yelu, do you want to come to my humble home for a visit?" Looking down the stage, it was only a quarter of an hour until the curfew. The crowd on the streets had already dispersed. Only the few of them were left on the lively and festive stage. It looked a bit strange. Yelu Yi smiled without batting an eyelid. "Prince Ding's invitation is this one's honor. But it's already late. It's really rude to visit the Ding King's Fu. This one will definitely pay a visit to Prince and Wang Fei on another day." Going to the Ding King's Fu for a visit at this time, Yelu Yi believed that as long as there wasn't anything wrong with the brain, they wouldn't make this decision. Seeing him refuse, Emo Xiuyao didn't force him. "Since it's like this, I and Miss Li will take our leave first. Prince Yelu and Mu Shitzi." Chapter 261. Yelu Yi smiled. This little prince also needs to return to the inn. As for Miss Yaoji, it was just a joke. I hope Miss Yaoji and Master Mu won't take offense. Mu Yang was stunned for a moment as if he didn't expect Yelu Yi to let go so easily. Yaoji also looked at Yelu Yi with some surprise. Yelu Yi didn't care, waving his hand, This one saw Master Mu's skills and was itching for a fight. If I offended you, please forgive me. Since the other party said so, Mu Yang naturally wouldn't pursue the matter. He nodded. Prince Yelu's skills are better, please excuse me. Yelu Yi raised his eyebrows and was about to speak when a cold light flashed from the corner of the street. Several black-clothed men rushed over. Yelu Yi tilted his head to avoid the oncoming blade light and casually slapped the assassin away. At the same time he turned to Emo Shuyao and smiled. Prince, turns out Chu Capital's knights are so dangerous. Emo Shuyao hugged Yi Li with one hand and grabbed the hand of an assassin with the other. With a slight force, the crisp sound of bones breaking in the middle of the night could be heard. Maybe it's because the tourists came from afar? After all, I remember that the capital's knights were very peaceful. Yelu Yi laughed and didn't refute. On the other side, Mu Yang was protecting Yaoji while fighting the enemy. Yaoji's body was a bit stiff. Although she didn't want Mu Yang to touch her again, she knew that now wasn't the time to be willful. She could only stay motionless and let Mu Yang hold her in his arms. However, the expression on his face was one of sadness. He had avoided the fear of encountering an assassin. The assassins obviously also noticed that the three men in front of them were all experts. However, Emo Shuyao and Mu Yang were each protecting a woman. Only Yelu Yi didn't have any worries and naturally went on a killing spree. The assassins secretly looked at each other and turned to attack Emo Shuyao and Mu Yang. As long as these two men were taken care of, the remaining one would naturally be easy to deal with. Yelu Yi, who had been pushed to the side, raised his eyebrows. Seeing that Emo Shuyao's side was handling the situation with ease, he turned around and charged towards Mu Yang's side. Yi Li helplessly allowed Emo Shuyao to pull her into his embrace. Although she knew that Emo Shuyao was more than capable of dealing with the assassin before them, she was not used to being protected in his embrace. However, Emo Shuyao's hand around her waist told her that Emo Shuyao had no intention of letting her go. Yi Li could only sigh helplessly, carefully watching the surrounding assassins just in case. He didn't know who these assassins were, but they didn't look like much. Yi Li thought uninterestedly. She had nothing to do. After marrying into the Ding King's residence, needless to say, she must have encountered many assassins. In Yi Li's eyes, these assassins were only mediocre. Seeing the three men take care of the assassins without much effort, Yi Li slightly frowned. Rather than calling it an assassination, it was more like they were putting on a show for someone to see. Not to mention the presence of these three people, there was also the shadow guard in the Prince Ding mansion. Yelu Yi couldn't really go out without guards. Even if it was just one of these three men, these assassins wouldn't be able to deal with them. Be careful. After the last assassin was taken care of by Yelu Yi, Yaoji immediately pushed Mu Yang away and retreated far away. Mu Yang looked at Yaoji, who was far away from him, and froze for a moment. He could only smile bitterly and turn around to thank Yelu Yi. Behind him, a fish that slipped through the net took the opportunity to shoot a hidden weapon at Yaoji. Yi Li cried out in alarm and grabbed a jade pendant from Emo Shuyao's waist. With a whoosh, the hidden weapon flew out and the jade pendant fell to the side and broke into several pieces on the ground. Wang Fei has good technique. After casually dealing with the last assassin, Yelu Yi looked back at Yi Li and praised. Just now, the assassin was too close to Princess Ding and the position of Princess Ding was a bit wrong. The jade pendant that Princess Ding threw out was able to hit the hidden weapon without hurting Yaoji. This was definitely not something that could be done by luck. Eyesight, technique, and strength were all indispensable. Yi Li didn't have time to pay attention to Yelu Ye's compliment. Just now, she didn't have anything suitable to make a hidden weapon, so she casually pulled off a jade pendant from Emo Shuyao's body and threw it out. Now that she had rescued him, she had time to worry about Emo Shuyao's jade pendant. After all, it was definitely not something ordinary that he carried with him. She walked over to where the jade pendant had fallen. Emo Shuyao grabbed her and asked with a raised brow, "What are you doing?" Yi Li said apologetically, "I'm going to take a look at that jade pendant. Is it all right?" Emo Shuyao smiled and looked at her with a smile as he asked, "If it's not all right, what should you do?" Yi Li furrowed her brow in distress. If it was just valuable, then it was fine. If it had some special use or special meaning, then it would be troublesome. Seeing Yi Li looking at him pitifully, Emo Shuyao's mood became even better. He pulled Yi Li into his arms and said with a bitter face, "Even though it's not anything important, but it's my favorite jade pendant. Wifey, what should I do?" Yi Li looked up at him. "I'll give you a new one." Emo Shuyao generously nodded. Alright, then it's settled. Wifey has to personally choose it. Seeing him so happy, Yili couldn't help but feel even more guilty. She secretly reflected on whether she had neglected him too much. Ever since they had gotten married, Emo Shuyao had personally taken care of her food and clothing, but Yili guiltily remembered that she seemed to have given him a piece of clothing on his birthday last year. That was because someone beside her had reminded her. Thinking of this, Yili felt even more that she hadn't treated Emo Shuyao too well. She seriously nodded and said, Alright, I'll personally choose it. Wifey is so good. Emo Shuyao said with a satisfied smile. Even though Emo Shuyao said he didn't care, Yili still went over to take the pouch she carried with her and put away the broken jade. On one side the two were tender and warm, but on the other side there was a chill everywhere. The atmosphere was so heavy that even Yelu Yi, who was watching the show, couldn't help but stand a little further away. Yaoji's face was deathly pale, no longer having the enchanting charm she had on the stage. The night wind of June made her shiver uncontrollably and hug her arms. The multicolored dress on her body only made her look even paler and more haggard. Mu Yang silently looked at the woman in front of him, a complicated light flashing through his eyes. He sighed and said in a low voice, Let's go, I'll send you back. Yaoji took a step back and said coldly, No need to trouble Shitsi, Yaoji knows the way back. Yaoji. Mu Yang called in a low voice, a trace of displeasure in his voice. Have you caused enough trouble? Throwing the embroidered ball in this kind of place. Do you want to ruin yourself? Yaoji raised her head and squeezed out a bitter smile on her pale face. Shitsi means that it's okay for me to throw the embroidered ball in Qingqing Lane? There are only ordinary people here, and the people coming and going in Qingqing Lane are all rich and powerful merchants. In any case, it's not a disgrace to the title of the capital's #1 dancer, right? Mu Yang's eyes flashed with a trace of annoyance and he said in a low voice, You know that's not what I meant. Yaoji was highly respected in the capital, not only because she had the support of Marquis Muyang's Shitsi and the Feng family's third young master, but also because of her outstanding dancing skills. More importantly, she never received guests in private and had a clean reputation. If Yaoji really. Then from tomorrow onwards, those rich and powerful people in the capital who coveted Yaoji would trample over Qingqing Lane. At that time no one would be able to help her. After all, Marquis Muyang's household and the Feng family couldn't become enemies with all the rich and powerful people in the capital for a prostitute. Chapter 262. Yaoji glanced at Yili, who was standing on the side. Her eyes were filled with sadness and envy. She slowly stepped forward and bowed slightly to Mu Yang. Thank you for taking care of me these past few years. Yaoji is very grateful. But, Shitsi, please go back, we don't have to meet again. Yaoji. Yaoji didn't look at him, she nodded to Yili and walked to the end of the street step by step. Yili frowned and secretly signaled the shadow guard to follow and escort Yaoji back to Qingqing Lane. Although it was already curfew, it was still dangerous for a woman to walk alone in the capital in the middle of the night. Mu Yang frowned and wanted to chase after her, but Yili stopped him. Shitsi, please wait. Mu Yang turned around and looked at Yili with a puzzled expression. Yili asked in a deep voice, What does the prince want to do by chasing after her? Mu Yang frowned. Naturally, it's to send her back. Yili said, So what if we send her back? I have met Miss Yaoji twice, how about I let someone do it for her? Shitsi doesn't trust me? Mu Yang looked at Yili hesitantly, but if Shitsi can't give Miss Yaoji the future she wants, it's better to break it off. Although a broken wrist is painful, I think Miss Yaoji will be able to endure it with her pride. If Shitsi blindly wavers, it may hurt the hearts of the two girls in the future. Yili said softly as she looked at Mu Yang. When she mentioned the two girls, she deliberately emphasized it. She reminded him that he not only needed to be responsible for Yaoji, but also the Miss Sun who was engaged to him. Mu Yang's body shook. He stared at Yili angrily and said, You don't know anything. Yili was silent. She really didn't know anything. She didn't know the relationship between Yaoji and Mu Yang, nor did she know the relationship between him and the Miss Sun. But with Yaoji's identity, if Shitsi Manor was willing to accept or Yaoji was willing, she could enter Marquis Muyang Manor as a concubine. But looking at the current situation, whether Yaoji herself was unwilling, Marquis Muyang disagreed. or the Sun family disagreed, it was obviously not feasible. Since that was the case, Mu Yang's hesitation was obviously not a good thing. After a moment of silence, Yili looked up at Emo Shuyao and said, "Let's go back." Emo Shuyao nodded. He glanced at Mu Yang and said faintly, "With the relationship between Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family, Marquis Muyang will never accept Yaoji." Then, without waiting for Mu Yang's reaction, she nodded to Yili and pulled Yili towards the Prince Ding mansion. It seemed that Emo Shuyao's words made Mu Yang's expression even more unsightly. He stood there for a long time before finally turning around and walking in the opposite direction. Yi Lu Yi, who was left alone, looked at the pair of figures in the distance and raised his eyebrows with interest. "Interesting woman. It seems that Emo Shuyao really has deep feelings for Princess Ding." Yi Lu Yi saw the jade pendant clearly. It was given by Emperor Taizu to the founding Prince Ding Emo Lanyun when the Dechu state was established. It could be said that it was a symbol of the Prince Ding's identity. But later on, the prestige of King Ding's mansion flourished day by day. There was no need for a jade pendant to represent their identity, so it gradually became an ordinary decorative jade pendant. But for the Prince Ding mansion, the significance of this jade was still incomparable to ordinary precious stones. Emo Shuyao, is it really good to expose such an obvious weakness in front of others? Or, do you not put eye in your eyes at all? The night sky was gracefully hung with a string of eyebrows, making the quiet street appear dim and cold. The two walked side by side. Emo Shuyao chuckled softly. "Is Lili still worried?" Yili was startled and looked at him doubtfully. Emo Shuyao smiled. "Isn't Lili worried about Yaoji?" Yili sighed helplessly. "Yaoji is such an outstanding woman. It's a pity that she was born in a brothel. Otherwise she wouldn't be so bumpy." Emo Shuyao lowered his head and looked at her. "Does Li want to help her? If Lili speaks up for her, perhaps Marquis Muyang's mansion will accept her." Yili shook her head. "Let's not talk about whether Yaoji is willing or not. As Princess Ding, forcing Marquis Muyang's mansion to accept someone they don't want to accept. Even if Yaoji enters Marquis Muyang's mansion, she won't have a good life. What's more, isn't that Miss Sun Muyang's legitimate fiancé? She didn't do anything. Why should she be forced to accept a love rival? If Muyang really loves Yaoji more than anything else, he will naturally take care of everything. If not, how can there be so many things in the world that benefit from both sides? I still say the same thing: give up when you should and break when you should." Emo Shuyao sighed softly. "Lili is really heartless. If Lili intercedes, both Marquis Muyang's mansion and Sun family will give face to Li." Yili glanced at him faintly. "If someone comes to me and asks me to accept a woman as Prince's concubine for her sake, I will just slap her away. Prince is so concerned about this issue, but does he also have this kind of concern? It doesn't matter. I'm very easy to talk to. As long as Prince personally tells me, it's fine." Looking at Emo Shuyao with a faint smile, Yili smiled very amiably. Emo Shuyao helplessly rubbed his nose. "I will never have this kind of concern in my life. Lili, don't worry." Yili snorted, not commenting on his promise. Just as they returned to the mansion, Emo Shuyao was invited to a meeting. Obviously, the people in the Prince Ding mansion had already received the news of Yelu Ye's appearance in the capital. Yili had just turned to go back to her room when Qin Feng appeared in front of her with a strange expression. Yili raised her eyebrows in confusion. She looked at him and smiled. "What's wrong? Was the training too easy recently? Why haven't you gone back to rest yet?" Qin Feng hesitated before saying, "Wang Fei, that Miss Yaoji?" Yili raised her eyebrows and suddenly realized, "You sent Yaoji back? Commander Qin really has free time. It seems like I should mention to Ensan that your training can be a bit more advanced. What happened to Yaoji?" Qin Feng's face was bitter. He looked at Yili and said, "She fainted on the side of the road before she reached Qingqing Lane. So?" Yili looked at him with a smile, a clear teasing in her eyes. Qin Feng could only force himself to say, "There's no so. This subordinate sent her back. I just came to report to Wang Fei." Yili sighed softly. She looked at Qin Feng and said, "You feel that she is very pitiful, don't you?" Qin Feng was silent. Yili said in a heavy voice, "I also feel that she is pitiful. But there are many things that we can't do just because we feel sympathy. Because there may be other people who will become pitiful because of our so-called kindness." Qin Feng understood. He nodded and said, "This subordinate knows his wrongs. Wang Fei, please forgive. Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled faintly. The moon is bright and clear. An outstanding person is bright and clear. Comfortable and quiet. A burden of heart and mind? Qin Feng was stunned for a moment before he quickly turned around and ran outside. This subordinate will take his leave. Seeing Qin Feng run away like he was running for his life, Yili couldn't help but smile. When she thought of Yaoji's stiff and straight back as she left, she could only sigh softly. She had promised Emo Shuyao that she would personally choose a jade pendant for him. Then she remembered that Emo Shuyao's birthday was coming up. The next day Yili took a few servant girls and went out. She looked at the shops that she frequented but didn't find any jade pendants or stones that were of any interest. Yili wasn't in a hurry. True top-quality jade was something that could be found but not sought. Good jade had either been carved but didn't meet her requirements, or the quality wasn't satisfactory. If she directly searched the Fu's storehouse, it wouldn't be sincere. Walking on the street, Yili had a headache as she thought.